All right, folks, we're going to get probably more folks coming in. So before I do intros and things like that, could everybody stand and face the flag for the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, before I do any intros and do some housekeeping stuff, I'm going to go ahead and move that the village board, we have a quorum. Deputy Mayor James Kane is out of district, and Trustee Bill Brain will be here a little later. He's commuting back up from New York City. So we have three. We do have a quorum, so I'm going to make a motion that we open the special joint meeting with the town council in order to discuss the water system master plan. May I have a second? All in favor? Aye. 3 ayes. Josh?
Okay, I'm gonna do the same. We have a quorum. I'm gonna make a motion that we open the joint special meeting with the village. We have a quorum. If I can get, can I get a motion?
So move.
Second.
Great.
All in favor?
Yes.
Okay, for those that don't know me, I'm Jimmy Galliano. I'm the mayor of the village of Cornwall-on-Hudson. Seated to my left is Supervisor Josh Wojciechowski from the town. I want to do a couple of quick intros, and then I'll do some housekeeping stuff, give you a quick opening, and then we're going to move right into this thing. Seated over here to my right is Michael Trainer. Mike is the Assistant Fire Chief for Storm King Engine Number 2, but in this capacity is serving as our Water Superintendent. That's the Water Superintendent for Greater Cornwall. That includes the town and the village. To his right is David Carnwright, who is one of the village trustees. There's an open space there. Trustee Bill Brain, as I mentioned before, will be a little late. Next to him is newly appointed trustee Lori Beth Paleota. That concludes the village side. On this end, there is Mr. Kerry McGinnis, who's a town councilman, Mr. Wynn Gold, who's a deputy supervisor, Miss Virginia Scott, who's a councilwoman, reached out to me today and said she's going to try to get here but may not be able to make it. Seated next to Mr. Gold is Miss Michael Rossi, another town councilwoman, and to her left is Mr. Tim McCarty, who is a town councilman. Up here at the dais, to my right is newly appointed Deputy Village Clerk Megan Gishwind. To her right is Jonathan DeJoy, Esquire, who is our counsel sitting in for Joe McKay, who's our usual counsel. To Josh's left is Jen McCormick, who is the town clerk. And to her left is,
Adam
that's
Rod.
not Mr. Steve Gabba,
No, pinching in for Steve.
okay?
Adam Rod.
Adam Rod. Okay, awesome. And I see that Trustee Bill Brain just arrived, so we have 4 members of the village council. Okay, a couple of housekeeping pieces real quick. The mics that we have set up, we don't have one for this table. We couldn't configure it with the way it's wired right now. But if you speak and put a little bass in your voice, it will be picked up on the mics in the room. If you whisper something in the back, be very careful because, Eric, you're right over here. And I'm glad you just stepped in because before I get to the housekeeping, behind Michael Trainer is Eric Denega, who is the Director of Highways, DPW Superintendent for Orange County, and a member of the villages and the town's water committee. He's representing the village. And to his left is Carla Castillo. Carla is the chair of the Cornwall Conservation Advisory Council, and she serves as the town's rep on our water committee. Tim McCarty is the elected official representing the town, and unfortunately absent tonight is James Kane, who represented the village as the deputy mayor. Seated to Eric's right is Jason Pitangaro. He has 3 members of his esteemed team here from P&D, Mr. Deutsch, Ms. Singh, and Ms. Moorhead, who put together this master plan, which we're going to get into and dig into very shortly. Housekeeping. If you get a chance, please, and you can do it when we take a break, but if you'll sign the sheet there, just so we know who's here, just sign your name and your address. This meeting is being live streamed, so if you go to the village website, you can click on that. The link will take you right to this meeting. If you're not here, and you guys are, you can watch at home. It'll also be archived and uploaded to our YouTube page. So if you can't watch it in real time, you can go back later and watch it. Restrooms, for those who aren't accustomed to the Edward C. Moulton Jr. boardroom that we are sitting in right now, if you go out these 2 double doors, you make a right, you make your first right. Women's is on the left, go down a couple of steps, The men's is just further past that on the left. Coffee, courtesy of the village, is outside from Two Houses. We shop local here. There's coffee, decaf, milk, creamer, all the stuff. And we also got donuts and cookies from Jones Farm. They're out there too, so feel free to grab those. And there's also bottled water as well. We're going to try to keep this as close to 2 hours as possible tonight, but we'll see how the robust question and answer and the debate and discussions between the board goes. So my quick intro is this. We started this, the village water system, in 1888. When we came up with a plan to deliver water. And we have the history, I had the village clerk put it together, and going through that and looking and seeing how this worked, where the village, which is 3,000 people, wasn't back in 1888, and the town, which is 13,000 people, it wasn't that in 1888, how it came to be that the village is responsible for water delivery. So when I got elected mayor 3 years ago, one of the first things I did when I sat down with Superintendent Train and the board was to look at our infrastructure. If you look at the front of the dais here, the big round pipe cross-section right there is a 10-inch cast iron water main with a huge fissure in the middle of it that was installed in 1895. 25% of the 52 miles of piping that we have throughout the village and the town is 1895 version. Holds up pretty good. You'll see two others. Mike, the 2-inch rolled steel is 1927.
Yes, I believe so.
And then the 4-inch mid-50s, 1955. So that's what the water is delivered through to all of our end state users. So it was concerning to me when it seemed like every week we were putting Band-Aids on sucking chest wounds. The big piece here, right here, the 1895 10-inch cross-section was pulled out of Hudson Street right down the road by my water guys from Village Hall. We were under a boil water advisory here for 3 days. Now, unfortunately, we have an 8-man team, and that handles all of Cornwall. And we're doing a lot of whack-a-mole right now. And so our plan tonight is to look at this, see what our water system consists of, and I think it'll be real helpful because after Josh and I speak, I'm going to turn it over to Mike, and Mike has forgotten more about the water system here than I think most of us will ever know. But to understand what we're dealing with, understand what the major threats are right now, what the things we need to really focus on, concentrate our efforts, and figure out ways to fund, and then go from there with action items so that we have a plan in place. Because everybody in this room that's elected and all the superintendents, including Mike, will not be here forever. So we want to put a lasting plan in place that at least gives a blueprint so that the next team that comes in, the next administrations that come in, the next superintendents that come in, have a way to move things forward. So tonight, we're going to talk about a lot of things. We're going to talk about funding mechanisms. We're going to talk about the villages and towns intermunicipal agreement. We're going to talk about a watershed protection plan. We're going to have our engineers give a brief on the draft, and I reiterate, draft preliminary master plan. We're not handing these out. We're not putting these on the website. These have not been approved by the boards, and this is a draft, but we're going to talk about them tonight. We're going to talk about capital improvements as well. And then we're going to talk about what the water committee that Mike Trainer, our water superintendent, Mr. Denega, Ms. Castillo, Deputy Mayor Kane, Councilman McCarty have worked on for the past 7 months to try to give us a good path forward. And with that, I'll yield the balance of my time to my friend and colleague, Joshua Wojciechowski.
Sure. So, I mean, quite frankly, this water system serves roughly 50% of the town residents, the major areas of our commercial ratables. If we don't keep this system in good working order well into the future, it's not going to support the tax base that supports the provision of essential services as well as our quality of life. And we really need to work together here because what we're finding is a lot of the funding out there, they actually want you to work together on, and we find that when we work together, we have the greater likelihood of being successful in obtaining the funding that we need. If we look at New York Forward, if we look at, even some congressional, grants that we're applying for together, even some funds that we're applying for on the state level, the state wants to see that we work together. The town provides, we've got the sewer plant, the village has the water, but we work together on all of this. And I think if we continue doing that and we make sure that both systems last well into the future, that the residents and the business community will be well served. Now, if we let this, falter and fall apart, then, that would be a real shame. So I think what the mayor and I are looking to do is at least, for the rest of his term and certainly for whatever I have left in office, we want to make sure that we leave this better than we found it. And that, that's my philosophy, and I believe that's his philosophy as well. And so that's part of the reason why we're here tonight.
So Josh and Town Council, thank you for coming and doing this. I think this is our third special joint meeting. I think this is healthy and good that we do this at every 6 months or every year, that we get together and do this, and that the community sees us working together to solve problems. And water is absolutely one of the 16 critical infrastructure sectors that the Department of Homeland Security has identified. And our water and wastewater system and our dams, which you're going to hear a lot about tonight, are 2 of those 16. It's important for us to protect them. It's important for us to rebuild things that need to be rebuilt, renovate, remediate, do all the things. So without further ado, I'm going to thank Josh and the council, thank my folks for being here, thank the public that showed up, and thank the folks that are watching this or will watch it down the road. I'm going to turn it over to Mike Traynor, our water superintendent, to give you a brief overview of our water system.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm not going to go over an overview of the system, because I think the engineers will take good care of that with their presentation, but I'll give some background to how we got here. For me, it's pretty exciting because oftentimes our water infrastructure gets overlooked, mainly because it's underground and the big buildings and whatnot are on the outskirts of the community. And it's human nature to become complacent every day unless there's no water coming out of the faucet when it's turned on, and not much thought's ever given to the complex and technical work that is performed on a daily basis to ensure the safe and plentiful supply of drinking water. So I welcome the opportunity to transition our maintenance and operation of the water system from being reactive in nature to being more proactive. And I want to thank the village and town leaders for recognizing that the water infrastructure is critical in nature and also critical to the future success of the community. So, as the mayor alluded to, the system began to be developed in 1888. First water mains went into the ground in 1895. They primarily traversed down Mountain Road and Continental Road, Main Street, and Hudson Street, and it provided water to the village, which was the population density at the time. Through those water mains, it brought water from the Gibson Reservoir in Black Rock Forest, as well as a much smaller reservoir, where if you ever walk up Peck's Road, you'll see it on the left-hand side. It's no longer in use. That road leads to our current Black Rock filter plant. Water mains were extended out from the 1895 transmission mains during the ensuing years and extended into other areas of the town of Cornwall, which were nearby. The reservoirs were the only supply of water for the community until the mid-1960s. In the mid-1960s, many in the community will remember the Con Edison project that was proposed. They were going to use our Black Rock reservoirs for that project. As part of that project, though, they had to find us new water supplies. They developed our Mountainville wells. They constructed our Catskill Aqueduct water treatment plant, which is out near the Cornwall High School. And they installed over 6 miles of 16-inch water main. And they constructed our current 500,000-gallon water storage tank. Although the project didn't move forward, the village retained ownership of the infrastructure, which is the foundation of our water system. Between the 60s and late 90s and early 2000s, small water main replacement projects were undertaken in both the town and the village, which accounted for much of the capital improvement investment made by the village. Additionally, the water district expanded as housing developments began to take shape. In the early 90s and 2000s, the village undertook many capital improvements, which included the rehabilitation of the Catskill Water Treatment Plant, Gibson and Arthur Reservoir dams, as well as construction of the new, or at the time new, the current Black Rock water treatment plant. Much of that work was done, again, in a reactive manner, as a direct response to the Safe Drinking Water Act and changing regulations and standards. In 2020, the village completed a $2 million improvement project to its well system. Much work included creating flood resiliency in response to the flooding which occurred at the wellfield site during Hurricanes Irene and Sandy. The improvement project also increased our permitted daily withdrawal in an effort to protect our water rights. While our community leaders historically have been good stewards of our water system in the past, due to financial constraints and changing regulations in the water industry, they were forced to manage the system in a reactive manner rather than proactive, which brings us to tonight's meeting. With the development of the Water Master Plan, much like the Community's Comprehension Plan, we hope to become proactive in our stewardships of the water system and develop it in a financially responsible manner, which ensures a robust and resilient water system for future generations to come. So with that, I'll turn it over to our team from P&D.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Mike. I'm Jason Pitengaro from Pitengaro and Doach. We are the engineering group that represents the village, and vis-a-vis the water system represents the town to some degree. And I think it's great that both parties have gotten here tonight, together tonight to go through this. We have been working with the village to prepare this master plan for a little over a year now. The idea came about through Mike and Jim's discussions and some of the improvements that Mike has made when he took over. And they asked us to prepare this, as we have done for some other communities. And so we're here tonight to share some of that material. We are presenting the draft of the report to the village and to the town. And we're going to ask you guys to go ahead and review that. And we're going to finalize things hopefully in the next few months with your guys' comments and so on. But I'd like to just go into our presentation tonight to discuss what we've prepared. So this is going to be a little difficult because the slideshow is behind some of you. But unfortunately, that's the setup for the room tonight. But I'm going to speak about all this stuff. So if you don't feel like spinning around in your seat, you won't need to. So as I mentioned, I'm Jason Pitengaro from Pitengaro and Doach. Darren Doach, my partner, is here. Kelly Moorhead, who manages our offices here tonight, as well as Maya Mansing, who has worked very, very diligently on this project. And all three of them and myself have worked on all of the village's stuff for the last since 2018, and the water system has been one of the primary focuses of the village. So we went ahead and prepared this plan, and the idea behind the plan is, as Mike has kind of alluded to move from reactionary to having a plan for things to happen. And this is meant to serve as a guide for the village so that they can be better stewards of the water system. As Jim mentioned, water, along with other infrastructure, is one of the most critical things that the village and town has. It's one of the most critical things that any human has, or any life form has. So I think it's without a doubt one of the most important things that we need to be concerned with. So being a good steward is, I think, a critical part of what the village and town needs to consider here. I just want to mention Mike because we work, I don't know, maybe in 10 different municipalities just in Orange County doing water and sewer work. And Mike, this isn't platitudes or any of that, is the most responsible, And the best steward of a water system or sewer system that or a highway system that you could have. So I think he's a huge asset. And when he was appointed, I think it was a huge benefit to the village. And I think you're going to see that immediately as we go through this presentation. The second idea or reason to create this plan is that, as I mentioned, the idea is that after the plan is reviewed and accepted, that the plan is adopted. And the reason why we want to do that is because, as Josh mentioned as well, when you go to make a funding application or other such application, it's often asked, is this part of an adopted plan? And it's kind of seems like a perfunctory question when it's asked, then you have a check yes or no, and often it's a comprehensive plan that you're referring to. But funding agencies want to know that the money that they're giving you is being spent responsibly. So having a plan that I don't want to say dictates, but spells out what your intentions are or why this is necessary is a very critical thing. So that's the purpose of the plan. The major components of the plan are the renewal and replacement of the water system assets. So as the mayor has mentioned, and you can see right in front of you, a lot of these assets are aged. A lot of them are in dire need of repair. There are very critical assets within the village which are not fully functional at this point and need to be looked at. And understanding those assets, planning for their repair is critical, and the budgeting and everything that goes along with that is what this is all about. It also improves operational efficiency. That goes for Mike and his team. They know what they're doing. The upgrades that, say, we've made at Taylor Road have improved both efficiency and I think reduced operator time that's needed there. And I think it also improves the ability of the boards to operate efficiently as well, too. If you have a plan that you're going off of, you know what your goals are and where you're going with things. And it'll speed up your process and decision-making going forward, too. And I think that allows you to respond to funding opportunities, and it eliminates also emergencies and things that just end up costing substantially more than they need to cost. It's also a capital asset management plan. And to put that in a really basic terms, how old is the stuff that you have? How long should it last? Very simply, where is it? And what size is it? And those types of basic things that having a record of, as Jim and everybody has mentioned, these folks are not, they're not going to be here operating this system forever. Mike, I think, has the benefit of sometimes picking the brain of Ralph Smith, the former water superintendent, who has a wealth of knowledge, but even still, having that in a plan and inventory form is, I think, something that's going to be a benefit to the village going forward for a very, very long time. So these are the priorities of the master plan, and they mimic the priorities of the water system in general, and hopefully the priorities of good stewardship by both the town and the village. The first is the preservation of the well fields that serve the village and the water quality of the reservoirs that make up the majority of the water system. The second priority is to modernize the water system. The system needs to be modernized without a doubt. We've just completed that work at Taylor Road. We'll see as we go forward that the Catskill water plant is in need of upgrade as well, and modernization. And I think the modernization pays dividends in terms of operational efficiencies as well. So I don't want to go through all of these. I just, they're all in the report, so you can see them all there. But I just do want to do a little comparing and contrasting. If you look at, let's say, a comprehensive plan is similar to this, but a comprehensive plan, I don't want to say it's like an autopilot. You complete it. It's a direction that the town or municipality is going in. But you basically, this is the plan. We're going forward with it, and this is how we kind of want to develop this. This plan, I think of more of, if you can remember, like a Chilton's auto repair manual that you might have gotten back in the days when you were repairing vehicles. It tells you about the parts of it, the intervals, the lifespans, how you go about making the basic repairs, and you still need to do all the work that goes into it. So after we go through this plan, we're still going to need to go through all of the repairs or upgrades that are needed to be done. It's not something that you just put away and refer to once in a while like you would with a comprehensive plan. It's something that's more of a living document that you need to take care of, like any mechanical asset that you would have. So,
Jay, if I can have you just stop for
Sure.
1 second. And I should have said this earlier, trustees, council members, if there's something that jumps out at you as he starts to move through this and get into the weeds, and you want to ask an immediate question, just throw your hand up and say, I got a question, and we'll do it then. If it's something that can wait till the end, when Jason is done, we're going to take a break, 5-10 minute break, let people re-coffee up, go to the bathroom, and then when we reconvene, I'll allow the board and the council to then pepper him with questions. But if you have something you want to get an immediate answer to, feel free to break in.
yeah, by all.
If that doesn't mess up your flow.
No, by all means, if you have questions, it may be easier in the moment to go ahead and ask them, and I'm glad to delve into things a little more or a little less, depending on how deep everybody wants to get. So, I was based on the agenda, I figured Mike would give her an overview of the water system, but he left that to me, and I'm glad to do that as well too. So, I just want to preface everything tonight by saying that this isn't supposed to be like a doom and gloom type situation. The village, and therefore thereby the town, is actually in very good position in terms of water, especially compared to not only other communities in this region, but throughout the world. So you have a water system that is older, but it was started and has been pretty well developed. On top of that, and we'll get into it now through this overview, it's pretty robust in that you have multiple facilities, you have a lot of water main and infrastructure already installed. As Josh mentioned, you have a business district that's served by this. You have nearly the entire, or maybe 100% of the village that is served by this, 50% of the town that it's already served by this. So you have a lot of good things going on already in the water system. So again, it's not meant to all be doom and gloom. You also are have the good fortune of having very good quality water for the water that you have here as well. So again, not something that even some of the more developed water systems that we work with in the county that do 9+ million gallons a day don't have the same water quality that you guys have. So you have that benefit already. So again, you're overall, the position is very good. The idea is to keep that position. So in terms of ownership and management, as Jim had mentioned, the village is the party in responsible charge for the system. It's an obligation that they have to maintain it. There are users throughout the system, and they need to continue to maintain it to supply those villages. It's not something where you can just say, oh, we're going to turn this off today or tomorrow. As Jim mentioned, there are boil water notices and such. The village has to respond to all those. There's regulations that the village needs to respond to. And so they are the responsible party in charge. But I think everybody that bothered to come to this meeting tonight is a stakeholder, I would assume, right? You're either a village resident, a town resident, village board, town board. And if you're a stakeholder and a user, I would consider you responsible to some degree as well. And that means from an environmental standpoint, that means from a usage standpoint, and just as a user and ratepayer for the water district. So we can go forward. We can drill down a little further into each of the different facilities, or we can go through things a little bit more broadly. So I'll start that way, and then you guys could direct where we go from there. So this is the what we'd call the table of contents for the master plan. It's actually quite lengthy. I'm not going to read all these things, but one of the main things that we're focusing on with this plan is what you see up front here is the distribution system. We're also working, as I mentioned, to catalog all the assets and develop schedules for maintenance and replacement of all those assets. We want to consider the development for the future of the water system. That includes growth, and that includes replacement of items. And we want to look at financing for those things in both the short term and the long term, and operating capital projects, et cetera. And some of those things are going on right now. Some of these projects are going on right now, like we have listed here the records room, which was newly finished, and we've inventoried all the water system records. We've gone through and digitized maps that are, some of them could be, 80 to 100 years old, maybe not 100, but 80 years old, definitely. And those have all been made into digital assets at this point, and there's a digital inventory of all that material. Basically, everything that the village had to it in paper form in terms of the water system is now available digitally. And it's cataloged, and it's available to the water department, and it'll be available to the future water departments as well. So that was already done, but having that is one of the things that is going to improve the water system overall. This is just a little summary of the water system by the numbers. We only have 7 operators here, 1 maintenance worker and 1 administrative worker. So a really lean staff for what you are managing. And considering the age, and I know Josh mentioned the sewer system and the water system, slightly different than the sewer system. The village has 3 water treatment plants. 2 of them are active right now, but still there's 3 different facilities that need to be managed and operated. And those facilities are required to operate within New York State standards. So that means that there is testing, rigorous amount of testing that's done every day at all of those facilities. So there has to be staff that is at those facilities, and this is everything is operating great. This is without any need to make modifications or adjustments, et cetera. Just the daily logging of it is onerous in and of itself. So there's only 7 folks working on that, and I, not including Mike, but I'm sure he's working on it as well. And then just a single administrator assisting with that too. And with that, there's also all the billing and records keeping that goes along with that, which they're also responsible for. There is about 2,600 service connections. They cover the 2 municipalities that are here tonight. It serves 4 fire departments. It serves 6,400 town residents approximately, and 3,300 village residents. So just to put that into perspective, it's a 66-34 split. So there's 64% of the users are within the town. So it's a large portion of the town, and I think that's why it's great that they're here tonight to know that this is something that's essential for them as well too. There's a total rated capacity of 3.91 million gallons. There's a total treatment capacity of 4.5 million gallons. Right now, we're delivering on average about 0.64 million gallons. So you have sufficient both treatment capacity and rated capacity at this time. And there's an average produce of about 0.78 million gallons a day. And you are at this point, I think the most up-to-date number is 13% water loss. So
Jason, that's water use, correct? Because we look at 750,000 gallons per day is what the greater Cornwall area consumes in water, correct?
yes, yes. And I just want to just point out that 13% number. It's honestly a very low number. In terms of the water industry, anything under 20%, I would say is very low in terms of water lost or unmetered water. It doesn't account for hydrant use and a lot of probably inter-village use. And in a lot of communities, you'll see that number hovering in the low 20s to mid 20s, even upper 20s. So a very, very low lost water here in the village.
Just as a point of reference also, if, in the chart in 2017, the average daily use was 890,000. When I came on the board, it was hovering right around 1 million.
Yep.
So that shows how much it's going down. In 2021, it's down to 768. What is it now, Mike? What did you say it was?
This summer, it's about 650,000 a day.
So a lot of that was lost water. A lot.
Leak detection and mitigation.
Yeah, leak detection and unmetered water or irregularly metered water. So we'll talk a little bit more about that too. So these are the treatment plants, and so let's think of them as in terms of like the heart of the water system. The distribution system might be the outlying portions of the system. But in Cornwall's case, as it currently stands, Jackson Avenue and Taylor Road are really more like the actual heart of the system. I would consider Catskill and Black Rock right now maybe more like kidneys. There's two of them, and one of them working is probably good enough because you have so much capacity. But all three are very critical. And we'll talk a little bit more about each of those individually. So Black Rock treats water from the reservoirs. It has a treatment capacity of 0.4 million gallons a day. Jackson Avenue and the Taylor Road well field is the biggest single producing water source, and it can produce up to 2 million gallons a day. And that is through the two wells that are there. As Mike mentioned, an upgrade was finished in 2020 on that system. And since then, Mike and his group have also made a number of upgrades within the facility itself, just through their own staff, which has really improved the whole facility, just in terms of the standard of the facility. If you went there from when we first started working here to now, it's literally night and day in there within the facility. So. I'm not sure how deep everybody wants to get into this, but Black Rock is the treatment source for the Black Rock reservoirs. It was built as one of the first microfiltration plants. That wasn't a trivial thing back when that was done. Microfiltration produces, I would say, ultra high quality water quality. It's limited in some ways, and that to get that high quality, you have a reduction in throughput, And that's why the facility only produces that, or is able to produce up to that 400,000 gallons a day. But there's benefits to it too, besides the high water quality. It is a scalable technology, so you could add to this facility fairly easily. It doesn't produce a lot of waste, which is a major benefit. But it does need to be running more consistently. And right now, BlackRock has not been running as consistently, partially due to some repairs that have been made, but mostly due to the fact that Taylor Road has been so productive and it hasn't been absolutely necessary to put this facility back online. It is fed by the dams that we'll talk about a little further. The dams are needed some repair, but they are all functional, and there's ample water supply to feed the facility. And this facility has a discharge permit, a speedies permit that discharges to the creek, and that permit was just renewed to allow the plant to continue to operate. We talked a bunch already about Jackson Avenue. This was built in the 60s, as Mike mentioned. It's in the town of Cornwall. It is, again, the heart of the water system. In addition to producing the most water, again, it's very high quality water, as opposed to many other well systems throughout the region. It doesn't need very much treatment at all under current regulations, and that has improved the financial abilities of the village, let's say, through reducing the cost for treatment. So relying on this water source has really been a boon for the village in terms of, and the town therefore, in terms of operating costs and expenditures. And also the upgrades that were done there have made the facility more robust. We've raised the well heads to make them more resilient to flooding. We have added backup power to the wells themselves. There's backup power at the treatment facility, and new water mains that were installed to allow proper chlorination and contact time for the facility as well. So, and we also have an upgraded water withdrawal permit that allows us to remove 2 million gallons a day. Just to delve a little bit further into this, it's not included on the slide here, but this facility is served by 2 wells. They're shallow, what's called shallow gravel aquifer wells. And what that means is that unlike a lot of the private wells that go down 200-300 feet, it could be a lot more. These are much more shallow. They're gravel packed, and they have an abundance of water, and it's a very prolific aquifer along the Moona Creek there. And I think I'm mentioning that for a couple of reasons. The main reason being that, one, they're obviously very good producers, but two, that area is extremely valuable to the village and the town in terms of the capacity there and the ability to continue to produce water again at a very, very cost-effective rate there. So,
Sir, we're going to have public comment at the very end. However, I'll allow one, because I didn't say that in the beginning, I will allow the question.
Thank you. So Jackson and Taylor are in exact proximity to each other. Are they on the same aquifer?
well, Jackson Avenue, so maybe I should have clarified this. We call the building, that building in that top picture there, Jackson Avenue Water Treatment Plant. It's, within, I don't know, what would you say, like a couple thousand feet of the wells themselves.
Working off the same aquifer?
Yes, but
We're talking about a single system, really.
it's a,
So we're calling it 4
exactly.
million gallon per day system.
It's 2 million gallons per day. No, combined, because there is no production at Jackson Avenue. The production is at the well field. It's treated in the building at Jackson Avenue, and that's because Of course, the well field is lower in the floodplain, and we wouldn't have the building up or situated in the floodplain. Sure.
Jace, we've had 3 really, really, really wet seasons, which has been a bountiful harvest for our reservoirs. Can you explain quickly, how does that impact our 2 wells there in the well field? Obviously it impacts the aquifer, but does that reduce the amount of water that we can pull from there if we have 2 really dry summers?
The gravel aquifer is generally full, so it does not have as great an impact as you would say from dry seasons like you have on a reservoir.
Right.
Just for a number for people to get a handle on, another community that has only a single source asked us to look at their reservoir and just for informational purposes, estimate what was lost just in terms of evaporation from that single reservoir. And it's over 6 billion gallons a year that's lost just in evaporation. And that's on an average, or it could be worse if it was an extremely dry season. So this is not subject to those kind of extremes, which again is why it's so valuable. Mike, I don't know if you want to. Yeah, of course.
So as the mayor alluded to, we had some very wet seasons. So prior to the $2 million upgrade, we were running those wells 24 hours a day because we could not use the modern technology to control them remotely. During that time period with the 24-hour runtime, those aquifers, the wells weren't allowed to recharge. So believe it or not, during the wetter seasons, I think last year was pretty dry, we were in much better shape than the previous year where it was a much wetter season, because with the new technology that we invested in, those wells are shutting down anywhere from 6 to 10 hours a day, allowing the wells to recharge.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, so as Mike is mentioning, everything is controlled down there. We didn't touch on this, but a very like basic premise of water and sewer usage is that it's diurnal. There's 2 peaks during the day when everybody gets up to get kids and off to work. Water demand is way high. Then all day you're somewhere else and you're not using any water. And then you come home and the same way you see your bandwidth go down on your internet, the water use goes way up as well. So there's those 2 peaks that are there in the system, and the wells have variable speed controls on them or variable frequency drives on them, so they are able to spool up and ramp down. They're able to operate independently or at the same time if necessary. And even though they're fairly close to each other, they don't have very much influence on each other. And again, that's because that aquifer remains saturated most of the time.
Jace, we're going to be able to move this within 30 minutes, you think? Because I want to make sure to give enough time for Mike.
Yeah, I'm going to step it up.
And then the thing is, you're going to get hit with questions.
Yep.
So
We're gonna move a bunch quicker now. So Catskill is an older facility. I won't spend very much time on this. It's not functioning right now, mostly because of the other 2 systems that are available, and for the main reason is that Catskill is part of the aqueduct system, and it requires you to first purchase the water, then treat the water. So it's obviously more expensive. What I would say in regards to Catskill is that it's still important. We know how many people are in New York City and how many people are served by the aqueduct system. I can assure you that those folks will not go without water, which means that these aquifers will stay, these aqueducts will stay functional. So having this as a source available to the village, I think, is very important. Although this facility does need quite a bit of investment, I think it's something, maybe not in the full capacity that it is at now, but something that the village should continue to pursue without question. Okay, so the water goes somewhere. Again, it's diurnal. That means that there's those peaks every day, and you need water storage. The town and village have the benefit of terrain, which a lot of places don't. If you've driven down through Maryland and so on, you see all those raised water tanks. We don't have that here. We have one water tank at Maple Road. It feeds through a smaller pump station, a group of homes that are at a little higher service pressure. But this is the only, what I would call above ground water tank within the whole water system. There is another 400 or so thousand gallon water storage tank of finished water at Black Rock's water treatment plant, but it's at a similar elevation as this, and they work simultaneously to provide the pressure throughout the system. So it's a huge benefit that some other municipalities that we serve have up to 8, 9, 10 different water tanks throughout their system. Those things need constant maintenance. If you have 8 or 9 water tanks, you are reservicing 1 or 2 of them every few years at a cost of a couple $1 million. I will say that this tank is over 60 years old, or about 60 years old, so it is probably need of refurbishment, and it would be a good, it's suggested or recommended that there be some redundancy added here to increase fire storage and just overall redundancy. If there's anything that the village lacks in redundancy, it's storage. And I think that would, additional storage at this location would allow you to, one, have that additional storage, the redundancy, and also to service this tank to keep it operational. It was built in the 60s, so it's old, but it was built in the 60s, so it was built well. And we have inspected it. We received a grant to inspect it from the county, and it's in a fairly good condition, but it does need to be refurbished.
What would a above ground storage tank look like today? It's obviously not going to look like a nuclear silo like this thing looks, like you pointed out. Would it be concrete? Would it be something similar to that, or different composition?
You could do a pre-stressed concrete tank, but likely what we would do here is either a steel or a glass lined tank.
Got it.
They are less expensive and they go up much more easily. So water, everybody realizes, right? Water seeks its own level. So the tank level is what controls pressure throughout the system. So you're not going to see some giant tall tank here. It wouldn't function with the system. You'd never be able to fill it any higher than this tank gets filled. So it would be very similar in height to this tank if you were to put in a tank adjacent to it. It may be a slightly different diameter, so you could hold more, but it would not be higher because it wouldn't be any function to it being higher.
And off the top of your head, what's the cost of something like that, ballpark? Are we talking $500,000? Are we talking over $1 million? Mike's laughing. Obviously, I need to go higher. So what are we talking?
No, well, so we just put in about a 230 or 40,000 gallon tank, so smaller than this. That tank cost about $280,000, good price, because it was about 1.5 years old, the price. So I think you're in that $500,000 to $700,000 range for a tank like this.
Okay.
Similar size, probably glass line, which is the most cost effective. The distribution system. So again, this is critical part of the system, something that we've worked quite a bit on cataloging. As the mayor mentioned, there's about 300,000 feet of pipe. There's over 50 miles of water main. All of this needs to be maintained. One of the other important things that I think the village and really the town is grappling with is that the village owns a lot of water main, but there's also a bunch of sections that are private water main. I think the village, as Josh, it might have been what he was alluding to, just received some funding to install some new water main that will serve the town. That probably wouldn't be possible because it would have burdened those residents financially to do that. But it's something that it's a pay now or pay later thing because it's continually rupturing. It's a lot of that rolled steel pipe that's been extremely problematic, and those leaks affect the village as well too. And that's all unmetered water that is lost that way.
Cast iron main still in operation?
25% of them, that one, the big 10-inch one right there, Kerry, with the fissure in it, 25% of what we have in ground is 1895 cast iron.
Kind of joints.
Some are leaded joints, some are universal joints.
It is. And it's lasted longer than the stuff from the 50s and the 20s.
Yeah, the rolled steel has been probably some of the most problematic. It's rolled, formed, and then welded, and it inevitably ruptures or leaks along the
That's the
weld.
one in the center, the 2-inch pipe there with you see the holes in it. That's the rolled steel.
And again, it's problematic because if it's owned by a group of homeowners, less than the number of people in this room right here, you're talking about $50,000 to $100,000 to replace small sections, and that cost is very burdensome to them. So making applications jointly, I think, is a way to deal with that, save the village water and money, and save those residents a lot of money in the long run. And provide them just literally with a more robust system. One of the areas that we're talking about, the flow is so low due to leaks and restrictions in the pipe that folks have supplemental water systems in their house where they store water so they can deal with those peaks that they have during the day. So water loss, we'll just touch on this again. In 2013, the last bullet point here, I don't want to dwell on this too much, but there was 56% lost water. We're down to 13% lost water. So a huge reduction in lost water, meaning a huge savings in money. And it's not just money in terms of water that's not metered or not billed. It's wear and tear on all the equipment that it takes to produce twice as much water as you need to produce. It's the wear and tear on all the vehicles, the employees, the man hours that go into it. So again, that 13% is a really effective and efficient number, a huge testament to the water department. And again, I'm sorry, but I can't stress how important that is, especially when I compare it to the other places where we're working. Again, just to be more brief here, the village has very good water quality. It meets all parameters with very little treatment. Again, it makes the village system operate very cost effectively. There are, as was mentioned, there's always new regulations coming forward. There was a Clean Water Act that resulted in tons of water regulations. It also resulted in a lot of funding opportunities. But there's going to be new regulations that are coming forward, and we'll get into that a little bit. But the village is already anticipating those and working to be proactive in that sense. So just in terms of PFAS, which is a major item of concern, I think everybody is aware of it just through New Windsor and that water system there. But those are the numbers for Cornwall's PFAS and PFOA. And as you can see, they're all within the current limits of 10 parts per trillion, which is, again, an astronomically small amount. But what we're looking at is 4 parts per trillion. So a nearly immeasurable amount. But that is the regulations that are going to be promulgated that we're going to have to be working towards. And Taylor Road, which we mentioned is one of our most important assets, is at 3.1 parts per trillion. So it's near that limit. Again, it's not a health concern. That's an ultra conservative limit. But it's a concern, and it's going to be a requirement. So it's not something that we're going to avoid. To that end, we did make a funding application this year for treatment at that facility, and we're hopeful that it'll be looked at again in a proactive fashion. That the village is being proactive in making that application.
If I could just interject, by way of comparison, 1 part per trillion is the equivalent of 1 grain of sand in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. That's how minuscule this stuff is. The labs can't even measure that amount.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why it isn't law yet, because it's again, almost impossible to measure.
Yeah.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about this, the intermunicipal agreement. It goes back a long, long time, but there really isn't a firm binding agreement between the village and town right now that allows the village to kind of substantiate its agreement when we make applications. So of all of the things that we would recommend in terms administratively through this process and through these meetings, is that the town and village come to that more concrete agreement that would solidify things and make these applications more
So when you
streamlined.
say an intermunicipal agreement, because I've been on the board for 4.5 years, we've never signed one, obviously, and that's to your point. So the way I see it, there's 3 things. I know Mike is going to get into this with the water committee, but one, we pay property taxes on town property where we have filtration plants and water department equipment and gear, those kind of things. 2, the town pays a higher rate for water per 1,000 gallons than the village does. And then 3, we have to work in the town sometimes. And when projects like the Main Street Bridge project are going on, we're replacing water mains. We have to make sure those things work together. Other than those 3 things, Jason, and maybe this is more of a political question than it is an engineer question, Mike, what other things should be included in an intermunicipal agreement? What should we be looking to work out?
Well, I think one thing that was demonstrated over this maybe last year and a half is some coordination in terms of capital projects. Right? We just did work on Chestnut, and that work was funded through CDBG funding for the town. And when the superintendent became aware that that project was going forward, he reached out and said, "Hey, Jay, there's water mains that are nearly useless here, and we're about to tear up the street. So let's get everything done at once." And we did. And I think that's a huge cost savings doing things once. So there's a whole section in the master plan about even just repaving and other utility work, so that having that coordination between the 2 parties, I think, is important. But yeah, it's, you have 2 lawyers here. It's a legal thing. But I think it's important that you have something that, I don't want to call it a checkbox, but the same way when we say that this project is part of a agreed upon plan, this project serves a combined district. And I think, again, that has led to better opportunity for funding for both.
Counselor, anything to add from your experience on municipal work when you've got a village and a town or 2 communities that one community delivers water to all of? Anything else to add to that? No? Okay.
Okay.
Good. Thank you.
Just again to touch on that, the town, the water system serves 6,400 folks in the town, and 3,300 in the village. The village maintains all the water lines. It also does all the metering and billing for those systems. So again, it's a huge component of their daily efforts to keep the system operational. These are some nearby water systems. It's something that the town and village should be aware of in terms of potential other intermunicipal agreements. We bring this up because those agreements could be both emergency and more permanent type of agreements. And again, water is a finite resource. It's at a point where water is going to become much more valuable than, I would say, oil or anything else that you're extracting from the ground. So working cooperatively, I think, is an important way of functioning. So you should be aware of these water systems. You should be speaking to them, and you should be actively trying to figure out ways to again work cooperatively, because it's one, it's just more cost effective, but two, it's for the greater good. Administratively, again, we have a small number of folks that work here. We're one of the obligations that the village has right now is this lead service line inventory. This is an inventory that has to be completed by next October. And when you take into account the number of service lines there are, basically, even if you only spent 2 hours on each of those connections, you're talking about 2 full-time employees for the next year. Mike is ahead of the game because he's already started this. A lot of places have reached out to us to submit grant requests this last period, which we did, to start this program. But again, it's a huge burden to do this, and it's going to take a lot of time in terms of employee time to get this completed. Other administrative needs, we're right now working on a new facility for the water department to operate out of. They currently share a facility, or it's more of a tenant agreement almost, with the highway department, and have not really adequate facilities to work on. So that's something that we're currently in progress with right now in terms of design.
So for the folks in the room, that means down on Shore Road where the DPW building is, building a separate standalone water facility. Right now, our DPW building was built originally some 20-something years ago with the intention that it would just be for DPW. The picture below the DPW building on this page, can you just go back one? That is of the Maple Avenue property that we have. Much of the water department does some work up there, but needs a bigger building. So that's something, again, that we're gonna have to build in cost for, and we're doing a review right now, our engineers, on what that cost would be to see if the village board would entertain approving its construction. Thanks, Jason.
Again, just these things are identified more thoroughly in the report, but in terms of capital needs, there's water main replacement that's ongoing or going to be ongoing now on Pex Road and Maple Street. The Main Street water main that was discussed, the bridge will be replaced there, and we're going to raise that main out of the creek bed there for resiliency purposes, and because now again is the time to do it in cooperation with the county. Angola Road, which is hopefully going to be funded and allowed for the replacement of some water main there that's privately owned and an extension of the publicly owned. And Harris and Hasbrook, which we're looking at as well, as particularly Hasbrook with funding from FEMA potentially. There's work, there was a grant request for Riley Road's backup generator. One of the important things that I'd like to mention is that there's been 1,200 smart meters installed. Those smart meters give real-time information to the residents and to the water department. It allows for better leak detection. It allows for people to realize their more cognizantly their water usage. And I think again, just from an environmental standpoint, it's an important thing that the village should be moving towards. And Mike is moving towards that. We've tried to get that funded. It's not an easy project to get funded, but regardless, he has moved forward with that and making good progress on that. The dams, Arthur Pond, Sphagnum, and Tamarack. Sphagnum is in need of some more significant repairs, but it's been evaluated by both our office and outside firms, and it's been lowered for precautionary purposes, but it's it needs to be repaired, but it's not anything that's of imminent danger. And I think it's, we just went through this region right here, Highland and Cornwall, and probably two of the worst storms in recent history. And neither have had any type of failure.
Let me just add one thing on that. So the December 23rd storm, the July 9th storm, which dumped, 6.9 inches of water on a, in a 3-hour period. And to Jason's point, Mike, we keep those reservoirs drawn down at a necessity. And one of the big reasons or the necessity is if you saw the state of their earthen dams and if you saw the state of the patchwork. And when I say, I'm not being hyperbolic here, when I say plywood, 2x4s, bubble gum, and dental floss. And before those storms, so this is before December 23rd, a year or so ago, and I had asked Jason and Mike the cost to repair that. The Sphagnum Dam the Sphagnum Reservoir is the fourth reservoir, the second from the top. We have 5 in descending order. And the one that Jason just pointed out is in the worst shape. We're probably talking about close to $2 million to do the necessary repairs and remediation, $2 million. And a lot of that would not be equipment. It's just the fact that these are such remote locations, you got to get the equipment in there. And absent having an Army Chinook or something like that to airlift it in, it's just tough, and to make work up there, very tough. So we're not going to dwell too much on these individual things tonight, but just to give you a perspective, $2 million, one dam. We may not have to do it now, but we're going to have to attend to it at some point in time. And if we do have a lot of dry seasons and water becomes a precious resource that we're in short supply of, not being able to keep those dams at full capacity, that hurts us.
Yep. We talked about upgrading Catskill Water Treatment Plant. Again, I think a necessity, maybe not to its capacity that it currently operates at, but to some capacity. The water department building, which we just mentioned, the second storage tank. We have given consideration to wells at Black Rock, which would hydrogeologically looks to be a very productive location for that. Along Taylor Road and further property acquisition along Taylor Road to augment the well area that's there. You need to have a certain ownership and control radius for each well that you have, and obtaining some more land there would be a huge benefit to the village and the town as well. So those are important things. And then we've touched on the lead service and PEX road improvements. Just to touch a little bit on the rate structure, again, we'll try and be brief here. The water system is funded through the water sales, so it's not a subsidized entity. It's funded through the sales of water, which is why reducing lost water and maximizing metered water through the smart meters is allowing the water department to generate some surplus. The current outside user rate is 33% higher than the village rate. The code calls for it to be 80% higher. So there's a
Well, let me just make one correction there. The outside user rate is 33%. That means if we sell it commercially, and there are arguments that people say, why did the village pass a law decades ago that requires the town to pay at the retail rate 80% above what the village pays? So that's the difference. Right now, that number, and I don't want to steal Mike's thunder, he's going to get into this with the water committee, but right now, the town is paying 36% more, even though the village code specifically requires 80% more than what village customers pay. We pay $12 per 1,000 gallons. The town pays $16 per 1,000 gallons. Jace?
Yep. And again, so those numbers, whether it's the village or town rate, sometimes they look high to folks. We were asked, how does this compare to other water rates? Just as an example, the town of Walk Hill has a lower rate, but what you don't know is that they, at face value, is that they also have a benefit assessment. That means if you don't even have a house or building or anything, any structure there, you're paying a benefit assessment fee on that property regardless of before any water is ever used. That was implemented a long time ago in the town of Walk Hill, probably the 60s, because it was very undeveloped at that time, and they knew that they were going to see a lot of development, and it allowed them to generate quite a bit of revenue without having to provide water. But in the village and town and the areas that are served already, the benefit of having that is a little less because there's not as much undeveloped parcels. So the bulk of the water revenue is still going to come from sales regardless of whether you had that or not. So this is just a touch on the water increases. From 2013 to 2019, it went from $8.56 to $12 per thousand for village, and $14.56 to $16 for town. That's per thousand gallons. So that works out to about 4% annually. What we've modeled in the plan is a 2% annual increase as a baseline. And I think the thought behind that is that it's a more steady revenue source. It's not impacting residents in larger jumps at a single time in terms of rates. And it lets the village keep pace with inflation. Not right now, but overall. And that can be adjusted as the revenue balance moves up and down. And what I would say is, okay, 2%, how much does that equate to for a typical family? So code requires for a 4-bedroom house, you to figure 440 gallons per day. I think it's probably more accurate at about 250 gallons per day. So you're talking about a couple dollars per month change in fee that you would pay. So basically those water bottles that you have on your table there, less than one of those water bottles per month increase is what you would end up seeing. Just quickly, that fund balance has been able to grow through that lost water reduction to about 1.6 billion. The operating budget has been about 3.2 million, and that's included about 400,000 in capital funding for water main replacements and such. And these are some of the projects that are likely to be funded with some of that capital fund balance there. I'm going to try and move a little quicker here so we don't all fall asleep. So these are the assumptions that were used for our model, which you're going to see just a glimpse of on the next sheet. We had to have a starting point and some assumptions. Obviously, these are variable and the model can be adjusted to incorporate, but these are the factors that went into the model here. So we can go on to the next slide. This shows the model, and the idea is to have a more concrete path for the next 5 to 10 years, which means planning out those projects. And then beyond that, it's a little bit more difficult to plan because we don't know what regulations and such are coming more than say 10 years down the line. But the model can be adjusted. And again, the idea that this is a little bit different than a comprehensive plan is that this is literally a working model where we can go in and make adjustments and shift these capital projects, and the model can be adjusted going forward. Again, we'll touch on this really briefly. Having a capital balance or a surplus is a benefit because it allows projects that are like sub $1 million not to have to be financed, which I think is it helps obviously financially because you're not paying interest on things, but it also helps quite a bit in savings in terms administratively. You don't need to go out to bond. You can move more effectively and efficiently on things. And it just gives you a little bit more freedom to operate effectively. In terms of funding, there's obviously the capital improvement funding that we're referring to. There's always bonds and bands, which are short-term instruments. CDBG, which the town has availed themselves of, and we've been able to piggyback on with some of our replacements. DWSRF funding. There's funding for some of the dams, and leak detection and special fundings programs. One of the main things, and we'll talk about it now, is that the village is very fortunate in terms of its residents, its median income and such. It's a great place to live, and with that comes the burden of living in a great place, and the eligibility for funding is much lower here than it would be in a lot of other communities. So it makes it difficult to acquire funding. Additionally, it's a very bucolic place to live, and a lot of the funding in the last 4 years has been focused on places that have been impacted by environmental situations. So what that graphic there is showing you is where the village is, and I believe the purple areas are the environmental justice areas. Those communities are getting right off the top, like in terms of grant funding, they are automatically, for most grants, at least 30% of the funding has to go to those communities. So it's set aside for those communities. So because of its good fortune and because of the nature of the village, it's often not eligible for a lot of funding. Mike asked, why didn't we apply for this dam funding, or why didn't we apply for this other funding? And we have made applications where we thought they were appropriate, and where we thought we had an opportunity, and our firm has had quite a bit of success with grant funding, but a lot of the applications are not really tailored to the location, and it's an unfortunate thing, but because of the good fortune. So again, it just makes the funding all that more critical. And this is the end of it. We were here tonight. We gathered both parties. The plan has been put together over the last year or so. The model has been put together. Obviously, like I mentioned, it can be adjusted and such. And what we would hope is that over the next month or so, that the village and/or town and those on the water committee can offer comment. We can finalize the plan, and then the plan can be adopted by the village. And again, it can be that kind of adopted plan that allows us to have that path moving forward. So what we're hoping is that over the next couple months, those comments will come in. We'll work more closely with Mike to finalize everything, and then early next year, the plan can be adopted. So,
Thank you, Jason. What I'm going to recommend we do right now is, why don't we take a 10-minute break? That way, if you want to use the restrooms, like I said, they're right around the corner here. If you go out to the left here, we've got coffee, water, and snacks. We'll reconvene here in 10 minutes. I'm going to have Mike give a 15-minute presentation from the Water Committee, and then we'll have some discussion and debate. You'll be here for that. So the questions, I think some of the questions will be answered by Mike's discussion, and then we'll allow a short period at the end for public comment. Okay? So let's go and take a 10-minute break.
Jim, should we be pausing the live meeting so we're not recording?
I think we'll record. I'll just mute it.
Yeah, Mike, if you can mute it, good point, Jace, but keep
Okay, we should be live.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started back up. It looks like we're thinning the herd just a little bit. So for about the next 15 minutes or so, the water superintendent is gonna give an overview on about Mike, how many months was it about?
We started meeting back in January. So we're at the 9-month mark.
Yeah, so for 9 months, these folks have been coming in. I see them on Friday mornings at 8 o'clock, folks with day jobs, and they've met with the water superintendent to try to get a grasp on what are some of the things that were enmeshed in the presentation that you just saw, but we're gonna pull out now and talk about how we need to tackle these things. So without further ado, Mr. Trainer.
Thanks. I do want to point out we have Matt Brady, the forest manager from BlackRock here, himself and the new director, Isabel Ashton. They've been very supportive of our efforts because they're part of our team, if you will. Even though they're not village employees or anything, we have a very strong relationship with them. And as Jason pointed out, he thanked me a lot, and he mentioned my name, but I'm just the manager. There's a staff below me that does all the work, and it's truly their efforts that keep the system running like it is. So last year, well, typically what happens when we have new trustees elected, we'll take them for a tour of the facilities, because it is an expansive system. And after Josh was elected, Mayor Galliano asked, hey, why don't we give Josh the same opportunity? And we came together, we spoke, and that turned into this local joint water committee that we have. Some of the things that we've been looking at, we toured all the facilities, we toured the dams. A lot of the things that are covered in the master plan we talk about. We've met with the engineers, the health department, the legal department to see what we can't do. We talk about intermunicipal agreements, water rates, funding sources, new emerging contaminants, capital improvements, private water lines, as well as the backup supplies, interconnections with other water systems. And how are we going to fund all this capital improvements? We're still formulating what's our priorities, if you will. We were waiting for this master plan to be presented so we could read that and dive into it. We hope to have to the board recommendations by the end of the year. I'd like to ask any of the committee members if they want to speak about anything.
I don't really have too much to add to that, but Eric Deneg, I'm on the Water Committee. I also serve as the Commissioner of Public Works for the county, but I'm here as a resident of Cornwall-on-Hudson. And I do want to thank Mike because Mike, we're very, very lucky to have Mike here. I mean, his heart and soul is in this water system. He cares about making a difference. He knows his stuff. He cares about continuously making improvements and learning what's the new technology and everything that's going on here and staying up with the system. So we've had the privilege to really understand the challenges the village and the town are facing with the water system. So I'd be very happy to be a part of that. And we've focused a lot on the IMA. I'll stress that the importance of the IMA and making it so that his folks can go into town roads and do it quickly and efficiently and not have to go through any type of a rigorous permitting system and get that all up front, get that into an IMA. Getting all on the same system, on the same page for how we're going to pay for infrastructure with the capital improvements, like any water district or sewer district or that you see in other municipalities. Things are done over decades and decades, and they're done in piecemeal quite often. And you end up with not quite really understanding how they got to that point, and then you're left kind of with a bag, sometimes trying to figure that out, how to move forward. So Mike has really been making a great effort to do that. I think it's been a great idea to bring in residents like myself and Carla, so we can come in from I guess you can say a non-political standpoint and give our point of view. We did talk also about maybe getting the town to adopt the village water code. We talked quite a bit about that. We talked about a lot of the private water systems and the challenges there. and how to maybe include that in IMA as well and get everybody on the same page. So other than that, I'm looking forward to coming to our conclusions. And, you know, again, Mike is a great asset here. He's been a pleasure to work with. So.
Jason alluded to a source protection program for our drinking water source. One of the challenges that we have is the village's water sources are in the town. We don't control, the village doesn't control zoning in the town and whatnot. So that is a challenge. And we spoke about that at our committee meetings about trying to not only adopt the water code into the town code, but also working with the town to develop that source water protection plan. You know, it is the village water system, but it's a community water system where we all have to work together on it. Carla, would you like to say anything?
Sure, thank you.
So it's been really a great pleasure and an honor to have been appointed to this committee, because while the work that I do in my professional life touches on water, I have never been as thoroughly informed in terms of the challenges and the successes that a community can have. Jason is absolutely right that not all communities work together as well as the town and village have been working on this. So that's truly, really commendable. I work at a regional level, so I see this day in, day out, where communities are not collaborating to the degree that we are. And I think one of the most important things that I'd like to commend Mike on is the conservation of the reduction in water waste. That was a huge reduction. And it's not only in terms of the cost savings, but also the environmental benefits. So as most people know, I'm the chair of the Cornwall Conservation Advisory Council. So of course I can't stop thinking about our natural resources. And so one of my biggest concerns is to ensure that when we think about our water use, we think about conservation, whether it's in terms of supply or usage, because we are seeing aquifer depletion throughout the country. We do have plentiful water here in our region, but we do have a lot of changing circumstances that may put us in a position, who knows how long into the future, where we have to be more concerned about availability. We continue to create lots of impervious surfaces that do not allow for recharge of our aquifers to the degree that they have been in the past. And we're having these huge, really dramatic storms that also do not allow for recharge. Just lots of flowing off the ground and not a lot of, not as much percolating into our aquifers. So that has been also part of the conversation that we've had. And I do believe that the plan that the town and village, that the village is going to come out with, is going to be something that's very strong and positive for the future of our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
The lone elected, you're good? Okay, Councilman McCarty says he's good. Okay. One of the other things that we haven't spoken about with the committee, well, we have a little bit, is we want to try and create an education program for the community. We've begun attending local community fairs to get the word out about different regulations going on, different needs of the water system. Through efforts with Matt and his team up in Black Rock Forest, the third graders from the Cornwall schools, they all, when they go through their trips to Black Rock, they spend some time at our Black Rock filtration plant with our chief operator, Don Bride. Learning where our water comes from, how it gets treated, and how it's delivered to their homes. So education is also a big part. And it's not just about water, it's about the water system as a whole. Oftentimes we'll get asked, why is there a village truck over by the high school? Well, that's because our filtration plant's over there, and nobody understands that. So trying to get the word out is a big part of our job. And we're going to continue to try and do that. And I think that will be one of the recommendations as well. That's it.
Thank you. Once again, 9 months these folks put in coming in here. in the beginning, a bi-weekly basis to sit down and talk about things. So before I open it up and allow, the board to have questions either from Mike or from members of the water committee or for our engineers. I mean, two of the major things that I think that we as a council and as a board need to grapple with. One is the intermunicipal agreement, which Josh and I are going to work with Michael and with council and with our engineers and figure out what that needs, how that needs to be constituted and get that done. We learned a big lesson with the New York Forward grant. We believe that it was in no small measure, we've been told a number of times, that we were even eligible for it was because we were two communities that was really one community working together. And a lot of these grants, including, as Jason's PowerPoint highlighted, from FEMA, we're not eligible for unless we have an intermunicipal agreement, and that's important going forward.
It's a big funding source.
Huge. Number two, water rates. The village code, which we've operated under now for decades, I think this goes back to at least the 60s, requires town residents and state users to pay 80% more for water than we do. It has been reduced over the years, trying to bring it in line, but in so doing that, we had to raise village rates to make that. And what is the right number? How do we do that? And how do we grapple with the fact that, our plants are on town property? We paid last year, I think it was $26,000 to the town in property taxes and $188,000 to the school district for property taxes. That's over $200,000. So we just need to figure out what makes sense. And that's something that the water committee took a look at. I'd like the town council to think about that because the village board has talked about this. And I don't know if there's an answer right now, obviously, but we need to think about that. And then the 6,000-pound purple gorilla in the room. We talked about funding mechanisms, and Mike highlighted it, that the water committee discussed it. And this is something that this village board has been grappling with since I came on board as the mayor in 2021. Shortly after I came on board, I had different municipalities approach me about the potential for us selling water. Now, there are different views on this, and let's just look at this as just, homogeneous communities. There are different views on this. Water is a precious resource. We have reduced the amount of water that we use on a daily basis to 750,000 gallons million gallons per day, 750,000 gallons per day, from a high of around 1.8, 1.5, 1.3 million gallons per day. That's a huge reduction. But you saw what we're permitted for. You saw what we can generate. Now, we know that we're not going to be blessed with the wet seasons we've had here, in perpetuity. We've had 3 of them, which kept our reservoirs full, our well field is fine. And since I've been mayor, through no credit of my own, but because of the amazing work that the water superintendent and his crew has done, we have not had to tap into the aqueduct. We're permitted for it. We could take water off of that in the event that we ran out of it somewhere else. Now, for everything we take off of the aqueduct, we have to have an equal backup source for that. We haven't had to do that in the last, how many years, Mike?
Almost
3 full years. We have not had to do that. That is a blessing. Now, having said that, and I appreciate tonight, former Mayor Joe Gross was here, former trustee Rick Joyce here. Rick sent me an article which I shared from the New York Times with the council, as well as the water committee and the village board from the New York Times, that talked about, the depletion and, the difficulties in replenishing aquifers as we talk about climate change, the warming of the planet. And then also concerns in the article in regards to communities that sell water. The law of unintended consequences, do you inadvertently encourage overdevelopment? And in places like the Hudson Valley, where we appreciate our green spaces, are we harming ourselves or harming our children and our grandchildren because we supply water someplace that is going to encourage more building, more development, more people? And obviously, we don't have, an infinite amount of room. That is one way to look at it. And I don't disagree with it. And I think that a lot of these things are dual-edged swords. But I passed up deals that would have completely refurbished our Catskill plant at a cost of $1.5 million. I passed up deals that would have gotten us back the Mountainville well and the undeveloped Taylor Road well field, which sits right next to ours. And if a certain community that owns that well field wants to bring it into operation, can do so at our peril. They're permitted to do it. They haven't, and it's not just one community. It's not just KJ that's come to us. There are other communities over the course of the last 20 years, but deals that would have allowed us to bring in millions of dollars a year. Okay, Jimmy, but everything can't be for sale. But if we have an abundance of it, and we come in and we see this out in front, which is what I walked into, and we looked at that. It's nobody's fault. People love that Town Hall and Village Hall look pretty out front, but they don't realize that underneath the ground, as Mike was saying, 52 miles of this, that's the vessel to deliver water to your children. Now, we do a great job of filtering it and treating it, but it's failing. And I'll say this as a neophyte in politics, every administration faces different challenges. This is mine and this is Josh's, because this is the town and village's biggest charge right now. We're in a decent place financially. 20 years ago, we were in a period of austerity. We had bonded out everything and we were bleeding money and we couldn't make our bills, pay our bills. We're not there now. Now, we're not rich, but you saw the median income here in the town of Cornwall and the village of Cornwall-on-Hudson. How does that help us? Well, it gives us money to pay for things. And for us, it's the 3 Ps: public safety, potholes, and pipes. Those are the 3 things that we should be hyper-focused on. But to replace those, when people don't see them, they see Mike's crew out there on Hudson Street or up on Main Street patching up a hole, cutting out sections of pipe that's over 100 years old and putting a quick fix patch on it. But it's not sustainable. What I'd like the council and the village board, and we all have different opinions of this, and from the village board's perspective, we're the ones that vote on it. But we want to include the town, since you are part of the greater Cornwall area, obviously, and it matters to your constituents as well. So I want you to think about, I know that there's a certain hysteria that comes when people think about selling water. Now, you can't sell water in perpetuity. We don't know how long we'd be in this position we are right now. Right now, conservatively, and I've had this conversation and the board has had this conversation with the water superintendent, we're in a position to sell 800,000 to 1 million gallons per day. At the cost that we could sell it, whether it was $10 per thousand or $12 or whatever, $15, $20, you do the math. And everything in this business is about striking deals to benefit our community. Should we be concerned about overdevelopment? Absolutely. Should we be concerned about the fact that we have an abundance of a precious resource now, but 5 years from now, we may not? We can't strike long-term deals. I can't stand long-term deals. But should we be considering the thought that when we have people that come to us with an entreaty to purchase water from us, to make the best possible deal we can? The deal that was on the table for us, New Windsor took it. New Windsor, a city of 29,000 people, we're 16,000 people. And could that have benefited us to get the Catskill plant online, to replace some of these pipes, to put $2 million into the Sphagnum Dam so that we don't have to have literal plywood and 2x4s shoring up the banks? Sure. So I appreciate Jason. Jason is right. He works with other municipalities. And as he said, you're in good shape. But, and I'm the guy that's coming to you and saying, what I've seen and what we've experienced here and what we're looking at in concert with a water superintendent that's been in this business for a long time, we're going to have to figure out different ways to be proactive and start paying to replace and remediate things. And I got to figure out a way to pay for it. Ain't going to happen during my term. I got 1 year and 6 months left, but I want the plans in place. And that's what the whole purpose of this thing was. That's what Josh and I have talked about. That's what the engineers did for us, is to tell us what do we need to focus on and how do we get there. So with that, I will get off my soapbox and my soliloquy, and I'll turn it over to the supervisor, and then I'll open it up to questions, comments, of either the engineers or the water committee or the water superintendent from the board and the council. Josh?
Sure. So for me, I look at this as obviously, the town has a potential for a certain amount of development that is going to happen. We've done, intercomprehensive plan. We did plan for, commercial development on 9W in that corridor and elsewhere in the town. We have, possible hotels coming online. We have other projects. In order to afford the services that we need to provide residents and also to support the school district, because that, the school district is actually the highest tax burden that we face as residents. In order to support that, we need to have economic growth, smart economic growth, and key to that is water. So without water and keeping the system up, we can't do any of this. And so for me, I guess the first thing is the source of water protection plan. I think that's pretty key. And so I would like to kind of figure out what pieces of legislation, policies we have to put in place. The town is looking at a tree preservation law. Are there other types of zoning and policies and legislation we need to adopt? So I really want to look at that, especially since, the water sources are in the town that are currently being used. So funding sources, key to that is the IMA. We're going to lose out on all kinds of funding if we don't have an IMA in place. And then I guess a question too that I have, with the overabundance of water that you have, is there any situation where the DEC says that the village is hoarding water, and we have a situation where, because my understanding is now, is water under the ground, is that like technically regulated by the state? So is there a scenario where the DEC could say, you're hoarding water, you have to sell it if somebody approaches you?
Thank you for teeing that up.
Yeah.
So there have been court cases in New York State where New York State, the DEC has required a contiguous community to provide water to a neighboring or contiguous community that did not have enough. I had talked to Mike about this too, about, do we need to be thinking about another well field? Do we need to be and Mike's caution to me was, no, you're not going to be allowed to, because you're only going to be permitted for so much. The state does not want us, nor is it even a moral thing to do, to hoard water. So we're not going to be drilling for more wells or trying to figure out ways to get more water in. We have an abundance. That's not in perpetuity. I get it. We all know that the planet is changing. We all know that, 10 years from now, it could be a different set of circumstances. At the moment, we are in a position to make a deal. Now, could the state come down? And I've asked this very question of people up in Albany. And the answer is yes. Is it common? No, it's a rare occurrence. Do I see it potentially happening around here? No, it's something to consider and to know that's on the back burner, that they could come in and compel us to help out. They could compel us to allow another community to run a pipeline through our community. They could compel us. They're going to look at what the greater good is. All I'm suggesting, and I've had hours and hours of conversations with my village board on this. I know Josh and his town council have touched on it before, but I think it's something that the community should be aware of, to know that we have that opportunity. We have a healthy fund balance, $1.6 million. It's a credit to this man and to previous administrations. We have a capital fund project. Every year we put $400K into that capital fund, or not exactly. Yeah, it is $400K. Into that fund. And we're trying to be proactive. We're trying to leave things in better shape than we found it. But the bottom line is, if we pass up on an opportunity, whether it's Woodbury, whether it's Washingtonville, whether it's Newburgh, whether it's KJ, whoever it is, I'm saying that opportunity may not be there down the road. And you may say, fine, we just don't want to sell water. And I get that. But then I'm going to need some creative minds to come forward and tell me how. Grants are available, but as Jason pointed out, we don't meet the threshold. We don't meet the criteria. The reason why the 10 homes in the village of Cornwall, and I think you had 15 after the storm in the town, people aren't getting individual assistance, is this: you make too much money. The median household income is too high. So the pot of money the state set aside, $3 million, we weren't eligible for. Well, it's the same thing with a lot of these grants. Our community is not eligible for it. They say, well, you're well enough off, you'll be fine. We have to figure out a way to pay for this. We don't want to raise taxes. Nobody wants to raise taxes, and especially here where I think you guys are taxed pretty healthily enough. So the thing is, and I've said this to my board, and I've talked to the town council and said the same thing. Bring me a solution. What are some other ways where the water superintendent and I had a conversation the other day, right now he could tick off $10 million worth of necessary. Now we're probably talking about tens of millions of dollars of repairs that need to be made, probably pushing $100 million when you think about all the pipes that need to be replaced. Can't do them all at one time. But as we start to triage things and prioritize them, where do we bring in the funds to do that? And wouldn't it be great that we replace and repair our water system by selling the very resource that passes through our infrastructure? Thoughts? Sir?
Mike or Jason or Mayor, can you, for the benefit of the public, can we talk about the requirements for withdrawals from the Catskill Aqueduct and showing we mentioned it, I think somebody touched on it briefly, but I'd like to make sure that that's very clearly articulated, the requirements for backups.
Good question. I think that, yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, so any community within Orange County is allowed to tap into the aqueduct. That's the city of Port Jervis, Village of Cornwall, town of Newburgh, any community. That's part of the approvals that New York City got when they were allowed to build the aqueduct. However, in order to connect, you must have an equal amount of production capacity that your withdrawal from the aqueduct would be. For us, we're permitted for, I believe it's around 800,000 or 900,000 gallons a day. That's all population based, and it's per capita based on New York City population. So that's how that's all determined on the population basis. So any community, if they tap into the aqueduct, they're going to have the backup supply as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think, Jason, in the report, it said 1.5 million for the aqueduct, I think.
So right now, our plant is designed to produce 1.5 million.
If it's up and running and serviceable.
Right.
Yeah.
It's actually.
Yeah.
And the aqueduct, can you talk about closures of the aqueduct that have taken place in recent years?
Yeah. So over the last, I want to say 5 years, there's been shutdowns of the aqueduct from, it started usually about November of each year through late winter, early spring, so they could perform maintenance on the Catskill Aqueduct, all part of the bypass with the Delaware Aqueduct. And again, a lot of communities were able to get funding from New York City to pay for their backup supply while that shutdowns occurred. We did not qualify for any.
So I have one question that's a little longer. I should, first of all, since I didn't say it first, thank you, the Water Committee and the engineers. I look forward to reading this very much. And do you all have a report or anything like that from the committee's work as well? Or is there a readout or a?
Not as of yet. There will be though. We wanted to read the master plan before.
So I thank you all for all the work on it. I know volunteering and putting in a lot of hard work that you all did over there. Thank you very much. And I have a question that might have a longer answer is methodology for the preparation of this report. But and I don't want to take up everybody's time with my questions. So backup requirement, shutdowns, thank you. And you've all touched on what the benefits of an IMA would be, grant preference, tax abatement, and the ability to work quickly on projects. I think that's it for me for the moment. I guess the other thing, long-term deals, if the state could potentially compel a community to sell water to a neighboring community where there are no pipe connections at the present time, where we're not even contiguous border to border, what ability would a municipality have to stop a deal that was in progress.
Yeah.
If a 5-year term of a contract or something like that, when growth requirements of the municipality that's selling the water say, hey, wait a minute, we gotta claw this back because we need to have this water for our use within our borders. That's a question.
Great question, and I'll say this at the risk of the water superintendent and the village treasurer yelling at me. The village has had a water system since 1888. Since around that time, we've had a policy that if we're providing water to you and you don't pay your bill, we should be able to shut the water off. And that is an explicit condition of accepting water from us. Do you want to know how many times in the history of this village we have shut off a resident's water? I know I just took away all my negotiation base, and I'm a big negotiator, so I really helped out there. We don't do it. Now, Bill's point, Trustee Brain's point, is an excellent one. If you make a deal with a neighboring community, I think there was a lot more support for selling water that could be trucked. We would set the rate, whatever that rate would be, and then we would construct a deal where they would be able to take water from us. We would work out how many thousands gallons per day, and we would sell it that way, but there would be no physical connection. But communities don't want to do that. It's too cost prohibitive to do it. The cost of trucking water, and some communities around here have done that. The cost is just too cost prohibitive. So they want to make a connection. Now, to Bill's point, you make a deal and you strike it, and we got two attorneys here, and you write it down. Contracts can be renegotiated and contracts can be nullified. And if the deal's for a year or 2 years or 3 years or whatever, the length of a project or whatever, and all of a sudden there's a crisis on the other end, is the state going to allow you to immediately divest yourself of that deal? I don't know. I mean, I'd like to believe the legal system would hold it up, but I don't know. And it is something that you have to factor in. And I think that was some of the reticence on my board to making some type of connection, even though that's the quickest, easiest, most efficient way to do so.
Just to tie it up for me, just to tie together two of my considerations. There's the backup requirement for backup supply. Connect to the aqueduct and you start drawdown on the aqueduct. In the event that you were selling that water, you would need to have your alternative supply as well. So you're essentially doubling the need in addition to what you're already drawing for your own consumption within the town. So those two things together, plus the likely difficulty of, if need arose, extricating from the sale situation. Those things for me are strong considerations just about the sale aspect of it. My only other question is methodology for the preparation of this report, but I think that's a nice to have for tonight. I think other people have things to ask.
And that's another important consideration, I think, for the council and the board. My board knows this. I think the council is aware of this, but the public also. When contiguous communities close to us that are attempting to get to the aqueduct are doing so, they have to have a backup supply of water, as the water superintendent and the village's engineer pointed out. They have to have an equal amount of water. Some of these communities would love to strike a deal for Cornwall to be that backup supply. Now, we say, no, we don't want to do that. Well, the only time they would need that water is when the aqueduct shuts down. And Mike, it's gotten less frequent over the last few years as they've gotten all the system kinks and quirks out. It's less and less and less time where you're off the aqueduct and you got to go to your backup supply, and you strike a deal to be the backup supply for 800,000, 1 million, 1.2 million gallons per day. We say no. Let's say this hypothetical community says, okay, we own property right next to your well field. We own property right next to your Woodbury Creek, and we're going to go to the DEC and get a permit to drill. We're allowed to do that just like any other community is able to do it. They drill a well. So they're drawing from the same aqueduct we're on, the same aquifer we're on, and we showed them that we did not act as their backup. These are just considerations, I think, that are worth having a conversation about. And again, I don't disagree with the article that former trustee Joy shared with me. I mean, it raises red flags about considerations about that. But by the same token, I look at this and go, does that go to the next town council and village board, or the one after, or 2 years after that, or 2 years after that? Who takes care of that, or do we leave it to our children? Anybody else with questions or comments before we turn it over and allow the public to weigh in?
Just a couple.
Go ahead, Dave.
First of all, we're only permitted to, withdraw 0.41 million gallons per day, when the maximum withdrawal could be double that. So I've always been in favor of seeking to have, that amount from the reservoir system increased from 400,000 a day to whatever we could get it. Now, that water is more expensive because it has to be treated.
Yep.
Well water doesn't have to be treated, and it's only chlorinated, but our system is a closed system, so every bit of water, whether it's coming out of a hydrant fighting a fire, or it's sprinkling your lawn, is treated water. We don't have a separate system. Some municipalities have a separate fire system. We don't have that. So that's another point. The aqueduct is the most expensive water. So the more we stay off the aqueduct, the better off we are. I mean, if we never have to go on the aqueduct, I would say that's a plus. And it's subject to shutdown for reasons that are out of our control, which is the biggest factor. Obviously, everyone has a right to connect to the aqueduct, and they all have. And our plant does need some work, but hopefully we'd be able to do that. As for selling water, have mixed emotions about it. I think the point Jim made about you sell and then communities continue to grow, and it's a vicious circle. So but I do realize that our infrastructure needs work. It's old, just like all infrastructure is. Most of the stuff was put in the 30s and the 40s when Cornwall really started to expand. I think that's about it, Jim. Like I said, I would be in favor of increasing our capacity in our own neighborhood. If it wasn't out in Mountainville, the well fields that are out there.
Yeah. Well said, Dave, and don't take my passion for anything other than I am agnostic on this, but I am trying to present the worst case scenario and then present options that I see and that that I have on the table that are potential, and just try to take the pulse of the room, the pulse of the council, the pulse of the village board, because everybody on the village board doesn't agree with me on everything, and that's healthy, but just to try to get some stimulation and talk. Anybody else on that topic or anything else? Yes, ma'am, Ms. Castillo.
So on that topic, I hear what you're saying, and yes, absolutely, the cost, there's a very extremely high figure in the report that I won't mention, but it practically blew my eyelids off when I saw it. And so if it were possible to institute an aquifer monitoring in order to be smart about when we need to pull back on the sale of water, and for that monitoring to be on a regular basis, and for any agreements to be tied to the health of the aquifer, that could potentially be a really smart way to approach that, if sale is the only way to address the declining infrastructure, natural decline in the infrastructure.
And that's a great point, and that's something that the town,
We just pull out of it.
yeah, the town of Cornwall, the village of Cornwall-on-Hudson, the town of Woodbury, and the village of Woodbury entered into an agreement. This was back before Josh and I were in these positions. I believe it was over the course of 5 years, Josh, or longer?
Yeah.
Was it longer?
That was long.
About 5 years, where we went in together to have a firm that whose expertise was hydrology. And what they did was set up monitors on the Woodbury Creek, which Tim is an avid hunter and fisher, will tell you we have it's a protected trout stream, but it also delivers water to people that are on wells that we don't provide water for. And obviously it fills up depletes if it goes down our aquifer too. Because we've had so many wet years in a row, we ended up pulling out of that right now. If something changes next year, we would go back into it. I believe the cost was about $20,000 or something.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, we have enough data, we have enough dry years and we have enough, wet years and, one of the things potentially we could do in the future is if, more water starts to come out of any of the wells that are being used by other municipalities in that area, because they connect to the aqueduct, we could potentially put something back online. It's just like an ongoing monitoring situation. But because we have enough data right now, we don't need to continue because we have enough, we know what's gonna happen in dry years, we know what's gonna happen in wet years.
Yep. What else? Who else on the council or the board? Anybody, any questions or any issues? As we said in the opening, we're not here to solve everything tonight. We want to put it on the radar. We took some things out of this, things that we need to work on together as two communities, an intermunicipal agreement. We need to look at things with water rates, and I'm really going to wait until the committee report comes off the water committee. Then the council and the village board will take a look at that in earnest and look at, again, what's fair. And obviously rates that were set 20 or 30 or 40 or 100 years ago have to be adjusted. And if we can adjust them down or make them neutral or whatever, we're going to look at all those things. We're trying to find the best thing to do. But again, a big piece of this is, how do we fund what needs to be done? I mean, we're going to be good this year. We may be good next year, but what do we do beyond this? And how do we start tackling some of these hard things, getting the public on board that we need to spend money to do this, but we don't want to just raise taxes and we don't want to bleed it out of other things because we appreciate all the things we have in this community. What are other ways, funding mechanisms that'll help us do that? Yep, go ahead, Mike.
I just wanted to point out, in terms of water sales to other communities, the 2010 Orange County Water Authority Master Plan highly recommends intermunicipal connections throughout Southeast Orange County. Whether it be, one of the ones that was highlighted was I think it's about a 6-mile water main connection between our water system and the village of Washingtonville. Because they run into problems a lot during a dry season. And, the Fir Cliff Heights water system right now, they purchase water from the town of New Windsor. So sales to other municipalities throughout the county is very common. I think Jason probably has experience with that. And he could probably go name a few more than I can, but those are the ones that I'm familiar with.
Mike, what was the deal that the town of New Windsor struck with the village of Karai Joel?
From what I understand, and I'm only privy to what was covered in the newspapers, was New Windsor is selling 500,000 gallons a day of New York City, or either New York City or their Butterhill well water, and they're going to generate about $2 million a year in revenue.
Is that via connection or trucking?
That's via connection.
Got it. Do you know how long, and again, I read the same article you did, do you know how long that deal was struck for? Is it a year-to-year deal or?
I don't know.
Okay.
Well, it looks to me like the aqueduct connection is gonna be done.
Should be done fairly
But
soon.
they gotta have the backup.
But
so
they have to have the
that'll serve
backup
as
supply.
backup.
Yeah.
And Trustee Carnwright, to your point, it is going to be done soon, but they don't have a way to filter the water, so they can't use it yet.
Yeah. What else from the town council or the village board? Any other questions or anything? I know it's a lot to absorb in one night and we dropped it all on you, but there will be a after action report done on this. It'll be done by my office and we'll talk about action items and we'll talk about who needs to do what and what things we need to be focusing on. And the first thing we need to do is take a look at the master plan again, get comments from the town council if you have any, the village board if you have any, the water superintendent in his office. I know they're gonna have some. Give those back to the engineers so that we can get a document and get that adopted as soon as possible. So, all right, if we don't have, yes, ma'am.
So on the mention, the supervisor mentioned a source water protection plan program. So for transparency's sake, I'm the executive director at the Hudson Valley Regional Council, and we're funded by the Department of Environmental Conservation through the 604B program. And one of the things that we deliver to municipalities at no cost is the preparation of drinking water source protection plans. So we can work with committees in order to develop a plan for a municipality. So there are also other providers in the region that do that, that are part of this program with the DEC, but you can always reach out to my office if you'd like.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you,
think we
Carla.
definitely would want to look into that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, seeing nothing else from either the elected bodies, I show about 15 minutes left, and I'll open this up to the general public. And if you would like to speak and address the council and the board, I just ask you to come to the podium to do so and just state your name and your address. And I'll keep it to 3 minutes, but if it's moving the ball along, I'll let you go longer. So anybody want to speak? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Toya Dubin. I live at 234 Taylor Road in Mountainville. First of all, I just want to say, wow, amazing presentations. You guys, I can't get over, first of all, the pipes are awesome. It's great to see them. That was a great visual aid. And it's very obvious that everyone has put an enormous amount of work into thinking about how to improve the water system, which is so heartening as a member of the community. I, of course, am listening to all of this with great concern. I live right at the well sources and hold property right there, and am concerned about it because those of us who are on the wells have a very different experience of what happens when there are wet and dry years and when there is more or less pumping. And so that's an aspect of this whole thing that I think would be interesting for discussion. I also was really fascinated to hear that you have a $1.6 million fund balance and that $400,000 is going into that annually, and that you're actually operating a water system at a profit. Bravo. How many people can say that? Or how many governments, small municipal governments, can say that they can do that? That's pretty great. In some ways, I hear that and I think, well, then why would you be considering sales of water as an additional funding source, since you are in fact operating at a profit and are doing such an awesome job of getting rid of leaks and therefore becoming ever more profitable, right? And so if your fairy godmother walked in here and said, here's $10 million and you can, build out absolutely all of the changes that you need to this system, poof, you would not be able to do that in a single year. It will take you many years to do it. So for me, it sounds sort of like you already have the system in place. You've got a profitable water system. You're able to self-fund incremental fixes to a water system that the town could tolerate, because there's no way all those residents could handle you just ripping it all up at once.
Yep.
Just because there's a deal on the table from some other organization doesn't mean we are obligated to take it. And those deals will continue to come. They won't go away. Future years, more development, climate change, the increased value of water, those deals will not go away. There's no urgency to making a deal at this point, from what I can tell from what you're talking about. So I would like to respectfully suggest that in examining the question of sales of water to other communities and what that could mean, that you add people and institutions and businesses to your committee that are dependent on wells. And we have a lot of them in the community. We have farms, we have educational institutions, we have all kinds of homes that are dependent on wells. And they will see this question quite differently than all of the people who are receiving water through a municipal system, wonderful though it is. They don't have the benefit of that, right? And so when changes happen in the well systems, they feel it, they know it.
Wonderfully said, ma'am. Absolutely wonderfully said. I'll add 2 points. First of all, thank you for the kind words. And I'm lucky because I inherited this largesse and the fact that we have a water department that does a great job and that we've been fiscally conservative in how we spend things. To your point about Jimmy, why would you, if you have a robust $1.6 million fund balance in the water system and you're bringing in $400,000 a year as part of capital, part of your capital project, why would you even think or need to do that? Because that is my catastrophic insurance. God forbid tonight, and literally when we went on break, the water superintendent and one of the trustees was on the phone with somebody. They had a big water problem and a break, and they were dealing with that and handling it. We've been doing it constantly. And I appreciate you because I was the one that insisted, because you have to see it, right? Those are actual jobs during my mayoralty where I said, I want a piece of that. I want a piece of that. I want a piece of that, because I can't, it's an abstraction to talk about 52 miles worth of piping. $1.6 million, to me, that is a lifetime worth of money to most of us, if not all of us in this room. But for what we have and looking at the gravity and the magnitude of the water system, I don't want to use the term pittance because that's probably a little overkill, but it's just not enough. And I'm not looking to do everything at one time, but those opportunities also get reduced when people get connected to the aqueduct. They may still come back and look for backup supply, and I get it. But ma'am, you are absolutely 100% right about us paying attention to Mountainville and paying attention to people on the wells out there. My concern about Taylor Road is this. I'm not gonna do anything to hurt you from our well field, but I don't own all the well fields out there. Other people do. And they're allowed to drill, they get a permit, and they're allowed to activate those well fields. Now we're competing for the same water, and now people on private wells or private lines, it's even more of a burden. So I hear what you're saying about the money that we have, and I'm proud that the board is proud to put that out and say, we're saving for a rainy day. I don't want to touch that to do these repairs. I don't want to touch that to say, let me invest that in the Sphagnum Dam right now. I'm trying to look at, can't do it all at one time, do it incrementally, but I just need to save something for a rainy day because the storm of July 9th caused $3 million worth of damage on Mountain Road alone. Not the water system, but Mountain Road, $3 million. Now we've applied to FEMA. We believe we're going to get funding for that, but it's just that there was incredible cost. And I'm looking at this little pot of money that we have, and it's a blessing. We all pay into it, all of us in-state water users, and I just don't want to deplete it. I want to leave that healthier than we found it and just look for some other sources. But I promise you, this board, I know this council, I don't speak for them, but I know this council too, we wouldn't do anything without talking to the public about it. I just wanted to put it out there and say, these are things, these are some of the considerations that we're considering.
I guess what I would say, since you live in the town, this is a situation where the water that the water system is using is coming from the town. And so I would think that we should almost establish like a water source protection committee, whether or not that's part of this, or it's a
Subcommittee
or it's a subcommittee, or it's a standalone, because certainly,
Water committee.
So the town has to deal with what happens when people in Mountainville's wells run dry, not the village and their water system. So it's kind of really, it's really, my problem, but on the same, token, that's where they're getting the water from. And so, certainly, I guess we would have to figure out how to incorporate, is it a separate standalone committee, a subcommittee? But I think we should certainly take those folks into account because again, they have to face this issue if the wells run dry out there. So.
Yep.
Well, I thank you for hearing me. And I would also say that should you I think it would be fair to all the residents in both the village and the town, because any decision to sell water is going to affect the value of all of their properties. So I think it should be a public referendum before a decision is made.
We would do all the proper required parliamentary procedures and that. Again, this is a discussion, and I thought it was good to put this out there and talk about it so people know, A, what we're facing, what we need to do, or at least give you some scope and magnitude of that, and then just put all the options on the table. But you're right, we wouldn't do anything without there being first a public information session, and that may be something. I don't know the requirements. I would have to check with the village clerk when she gets back, but I imagine it might be subject to a public referendum. And if it wasn't subject to a public referendum, I guarantee there'd probably be enough energized people that would put it on the ballot and require it by going out and getting
Well, it's
signatures.
something that I could, so look, we obviously have to negotiate an IMA, so perhaps the IMA is a way to deal with how the town gets a say in water sales is through the IMA process, putting something
Sure.
in that would, so, maybe that's a way for the town board to get a say, is putting something in the IMA that would allow us to, but again, we haven't gotten to that point yet, so maybe there is something we can do to that effect.
But thank you, all good points, appreciate
I
that.
really
Thanks for-
appreciate your giving me so much time. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And Mike, thank you so much.
Well said, thank you, ma'am. Anybody else from the public, anybody else wish to speak? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Betsy Delaney. I am a
Can you spell your last name, ma'am?
Delaney.
And what's
and,
your residence?
It's 17 Willowbrook Lane in Mountainville, and I'm a neighbor of Toya's.
Okay.
So share some of her similar concerns, and I appreciate everything that she said. But I just have some questions about the plan. Now, it sounds to me, and maybe I have this, I've, perhaps not processed this properly, but it sounds to me like what the town is, or what the village is considering doing is selling 1 million gallons of water a day to another party. Was that the number that I heard, or?
So we don't have, there's no offers out there right now.
I think
this-
someone used the term 1 million.
I did.
Okay.
I said, because I went to the water, so let me give you the backstory. I went to the water superintendent who said that, what could we do? We have much more extra than that, but where
Okay,
would we conservatively put a number?
Okay, but that's what my question is about. That's what I'm wondering, how that number was derived.
I went to the water superintendent, asked him what he thought would be available water to sell if we ever sold water without impacting us and leaving us
Okay,
know.
so there hasn't been the hydrologic studies. Have there been stress tests on the aquifer, that type of thing, to calculate that number, to come up with what the number could
Mike,
be?
Jason, I'll leave it to.
You've done that, and will that be in the report? That's the other question I wanted to
What I
know.
would say to that is that the way Mike arrived at that number wasn't part of the discussion, but I would say is based on what we are permitted to withdraw, which is based on actual studies.
That were done since you rehabilitated the wells, or were done before, were originally done before?
Get too much further, if I may.
Okay, I'm just trying to get
No, 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 I
information.
know, I
Yeah,
know,
yeah, I'm
I
just
know.
trying to understand where the numbers are coming
Part
from.
of the conversation that came up about sale of water wasn't necessarily selling well water. We have a connection to the Catskill Aqueduct, which currently is not being used.
So then you're thinking about using the well water as backup and selling the water in the aqueduct? No,
No,
okay,
the well water is our water.
right.
We're not looking necessarily to sell that.
But you have to keep a certain capacity to draw from the aquifer, correct?
Correct.
So is that what you were thinking about, or no?
We
Okay.
have a filtration plant that is sitting idle that is costing us just to sit idle $200,000 a year, between property taxes, energy costs, maintenance, whatnot. And if there's a way that we could use that plant to sell water to other communities that are eligible to receive water from the aqueduct, it might be beneficial to our community. We wouldn't be selling
Okay.
our water out of our system.
Well,
What's
then,
our capacity on the aqueducts? What's our potential drawdown on the aqueduct? I think that's what you're looking for.
I'm
The total
trying.
number, I think, is what, 3.9 million gallons?
1.5 out of the.
No, but total for the whole community, and then
3.9.
1.5 from the aqueduct. Right.
3.9.
Does that help, ma'am?
Well, I guess what I'm wondering is this report that's coming out, which I don't know exactly when it's coming out or what the content is going to be, will like the
Wait,
backup calculations and so forth be in there so that we can see, you know, where those,
So ma'am,
what the potential sale number is, yeah.
tonight you got a Cliff Notes version of the master plan that we received last week. So we're
Right.
still digging through that and
Okay.
going through that.
So I was just wondering if those calculations are in there or that's something for a later time
Well,
or,
I didn't,
yeah.
I didn't ask them to do that. That wasn't
Okay.
part of their mission. Their mission was to give us, look at our water system, tell us what it is, what's in desperate need of repair, what can wait for long-term, give us some perspective on that.
So it's more back of the envelope at this point is where
I
you would
love,
characterize
I
it.
love the metaphor.
Okay, okay, well then I would urge you, if you decide to pursue this type of a course of action, that you actually do the studies and do the calculations and so forth
I would-
before you make that
I
decision.
want to mention, though, that the withdrawal permit for the wells was fairly recently updated, and in water years, very recently updated.
And they include the calculations. So we wouldn't do new calculations. If
Okay.
we're permitted to take 2 million gallons out per day, and we're using 1 million gallons,
Okay.
and we look to sell 800,000 gallons, that permit says to us that we're not doing damage to the
Okay.
aquifer.
So you're saying you have existing
Yeah.
stress test, hydrology data and everything from that's available?
Yeah,
Will
so
that be available?
the wells are permitted at 2 MGD, and the total draw currently of the wells is 700,000 to 800,000 gallons per day. So
Right.
less than 50% of what the permitted capacity is. The permitted capacity is
Well,
based
I
on.
understand that there's permitted capacity and I understand, you know, relying on the test data and so forth. But then, you know, we've got someone who lives right next to it who says, well, I experience, you know,
If you have a
So-
residential well, my suspicion is that it's not, and I don't know your well specifically, but that it's
it's
not.
may not be screened in the same aquifer is what you're
It's not
saying,
that it's
yeah.
not in the same aquifer, it's just not the same type of well and is not drawing water from the same way that the municipalities' wells are drawing water.
And the aqueduct that they're referring to, we're selling water from the aqueduct will not affect the aquifer by Taylor Road.
Right.
It's
We would
completely
treat
two
it.
different water sources.
I
The aqueduct
understand that.
draws
So
from
you're
the reservoir
saying you're
upstairs.
just selling, so the thought is, rather than actually selling the water from the town's resources, you're thinking about selling the town's or almost renting out the town's capacity to kind of like a rental kind of situation to them to be able to then draw from the aqueduct.
Correct.
Okay. So the idea would be only if you lost the capacity only if you, if you didn't have the capacity and had to go into the aqueduct, would it be a problem? Because you would have to remove that amount from your availability. Okay, I think I understand that then. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I mean, great points and thanks. We're all getting educated by hearing this. Anybody else? Anybody else from the public wish to speak? Because I know we're over. Yes, sir, Mr. Joya.
Thank you all. Rick Joya from the Village,
Just need an address, Rick.
167 Hudson. So the 2% that you're calculating for rate increases, how does that factor in terms of over time increases to the fund balance? Would that be something that would ratchet up the amount of revenue draw from the community that would increase the fund balance, or is that how does 2% factor?
Well, 2% is a baseline that we used, but you have to weigh that against increased costs.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, inflation,
Sure.
all the other things that the villages are going to experience. The idea is instead of having a more significant increase every 4 or 5 years, that you have a smaller.
Oh, more
incremental
regular.
Increase. It's on a regular basis. It just gives the village a little bit more predictability in terms of planning. And I think it gives a resident a little bit more predictability in terms of what they're expecting to pay.
So if the rate increase has gone up, I forget what the time frame was, from 12 to 16, or for the town, or
I think it was more than that.
over what?
It was 40% over 10 years for village cost and 10% over 10 years for town cost.
Yeah.
Okay, so 40% over 10, did you say?
Over 10 years.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's 4%. So you're actually now a 4% per year.
For village residents, right?
For
Do I have the
and so-
table right?
Yeah.
So then
that-
2% is
that's what it was,
actually-
and that wasn't like a compounded rate. It was figured on a flat basis, just for, ease of figuring it, but the difference is gonna be negligible.
Okay, but 2% actually is less.
2% is less, yes.
Okay.
But it's more regular.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
I would also ask that the slideshow that was presented maybe be available on the town or the village website for people to be able to look over, because I couldn't really read everything, and I'd love to spend a little more time looking at that.
Understood. That is absolutely our goal, Rick. The only thing I want to do is I don't want to put a draft out. And I want to make sure that I've got a chance to sit down with Mike, sit down with our engineers, make sure the board and the council don't have any revisions, changes, objections. And then our commitment is to put this on the village website. I'm sure Josh is going to do the same on the town website. But we're not ready to put it out to the public.
Okay.
This is a draft.
Okay.
Take
Go,
some of your
please.
time, Rick.
Yeah.
Just to clarify on that point about a draft, and I'm asking this. Depending on what's required by law to adopt a plan like this, it is likely that the first publicly available version of this would formally be a plan if it is subject to public comment or anything like that before it's adopted. So
Yeah, I think you're right,
this is a
Bill.
rough draft. Then
Yeah.
there's someday there will be a draft that is sort of sharing, right?
I mean, we went through how many versions just for the Donahue Farm Conservation and Maintenance Plan, and that wasn't nearly this exhaustive. So, yeah, we'll get it up as soon as we can, and we will discuss this at our village board
Okay.
meeting. But I'm not going to put anything on websites or make paper copies available to the public because it is a draft.
Okay, fair enough. From what I had read in that article in the Times, and also just in speaking with some people with knowledge of water policy and hydrology, it seems like hydrology is an evolving science. I suppose all science can be considered evolving, but well, at least we hope. But anyway, there's it seems that we don't really have such exact metrics on draw and replenishment time. I mean, estimates are made, but if we get into a situation where we're starting to redline, I'm not saying we would create a situation where we would, but there needs to be an adequate buffer. I can't even go there, but curious, shallow travel aquifers, are they more easily replenished than deep aquifers? Is there any way to compare? I mean, it seems like they might be more susceptible to sequential drought years, let's say. I mean, if it's when I hear shallow, I think not deep, and then I wonder, how would that sustain if suddenly the system was under duress for a number of years? So that was just something that you called it shallow travel, and I thought, well, that's
Just to be
interesting.
clear, it's called shallow gravel,
Oh, shallow gravel. Okay, sorry.
and it just means that there's a lot of interstitial pore space,
I see.
and it's basically saturated at all times.
Okay.
Of course, if there's sustained drought for 3, 4, 5, 10 years, I mean, obviously those effects, I don't know that that's what's accounted for. I'm an engineer, not a hydrogeologist, but the safe yield accounts for that, but, again, does it account for a catastrophic drought? I don't know that you could predict.
Sure. There's no way.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like predicting a vehicle accident.
Right.
Not-
I understand. And then the last thing I would just say is, yeah, we're imagining this scenario where, oh, it's no skin off our back to just sell water from the aqueduct because that's not water we want to pay for anyway because it's the most expensive source. But by the same token, BlackRock is, I've said it at meetings before, it's like, the Maserati that spends more time in the shop than it does on the road. Historically, that has been a very problematic source of water, and it would be wonderful if it ever got to the level of dependability that we'd all love it to be at. It hasn't happened yet. So, and I know it's a work in progress, but that one is, that's a tough birth. Anyway,
Thanks,
thanks.
Rick.
Thank you all.
Appreciate that. All right, anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Toya Dubant Stovall. I live at 227 Taylor Road. I was curious, what is the depth of a shallow gravel well?
80 feet?
80 feet. And what is,
Oh, no, I'm guessing because that's what ours are.
Yeah, it varies. They could be from 40, 60, 80 feet. The well is drilled, it's developed. And again, I'm not a hydrogeologist, but we're doing this right now in another community. It's developed and you have an expected yield when it's developed to the point that it's producing that expected yield. We'll go ahead and turn it over into production.
sure. And what is the depth of a standard residential well?
I think that varies too, but again, a residential well is usually what's called a bedrock well, which means it's a drilled well into bedrock. And I would say they're typically range from 200 to, I believe, one of our employees, her well is 900 feet deep. And so there's it's just a different rock formation.
Sure. Part of this line of questioning is that one of the wonderful things about Mountainville, and especially Taylor Road, is that very beautiful, bucolic agricultural look. It's while not everybody sees those rolling meadows as agricultural land, it is actually largely hay fields that are used to feed livestock and, Farms Feed America, et cetera. So my concern in hearing this is a depletion of a relatively shallow top layer of soil from that draw. Is that going to be damaging to all of the agricultural properties that are in those immediate environments that support so many other industries? Is that going to be damaging to the character of Mountainville? And in addition, that depth sounds somewhat similar to some of the residential wells, which are those surveyed in these surveys that you're talking about? It sounds like they've surveyed town and village water, but does that include all of these individual wells? Like my family is here, my friends are here, many of us live on these same streets. As you're pulling these bigger amounts to potentially sell, and even in potentially times of duress, will you bleed us dry with the best of intentions to help support everything? And with the agricultural character of that land, does that have the potential to devastate potential livelihoods for farmers in our area?
Go ahead,
I
Jason.
can't speak to your particular wells, but in terms of the agricultural point, there's not overlap of effect. The well is screened, it only draws water from a certain strata, it's set at a certain level. Your plants or hay, whatever it is, whether even a tree, the roots only go so deep, so they're only drawing water from a certain amount of soil. It's generally from precipitation. It's not from groundwater that they're drawing up. So that I don't think is going to be an effect. Again, to the specific wells, I can't speak to that.
Sure.
I don't know the.
Is there any way that those, or a survey of wells within a surrounding region of Taylor Road, could be considered as we move forward with this to see if there would be any kind of impact to the residents there who, are not supported by pipes running to our houses? But if you're selling water.
From the aqueduct.
There's no proposal right now to sell water.
Mhm.
You know, right now, the village board has said that they would consider in the future to fund these improvements, but there's nothing right now. Nobody's knocking on the door saying, hey, we want to buy water.
And we're not taking water from the Taylor Road well fields to be part of a consideration in any deal.
Okay.
So this is water that we would buy,
Mhm.
that we would treat, and then we would sell at a profit.
All right, I've got one last one. There was a little note in the presentation about the potential acquisition of more land on Taylor Road for wells. Does anybody want to touch on that?
Chase?
Again, it's a rich source. We've either through protection or through acquisition of parcels. I think if it's in the control of the village, it's a better opportunity.
Well, without getting into the minutia, again, I mean, I know that there is solid resistance to the discussion of selling water. We could have possibly gotten that well field back
Two
if-
more wells.
if we had struck a deal to sell water. Those well fields, which aren't ours, aren't in operation, but if they are in operation, they could impact you. But trying to get those back would have required striking a deal. And you know, you gotta factor in a lot of things, who it's gonna impact, how long it's gonna impact things. But again, we don't have anything to do with a private entity. And and when I say they, meaning any owner of a piece of property, and they go through the DEC and get a permit for it, they can drill if the permit is allowed. And it could be right next to our well field. It could be right next to the Woodbury Creek. We don't control that. My thing was try to get as many resources back in our hands that never should have left our hands. But I couldn't do that without selling water. But you say selling water, and that causes people to lose their minds. Well, there are wells out there and there are well fields out there that we don't own. Sir. Sir, that is a great question. But when it comes to something like this, and we've researched it and looked at these kind of things, when it comes to that, I haven't seen that successful rate of saying to somebody, we're going to take over a well that somebody owns, that the DEC, New York State, has permitted them to use. And I'll turn to council. Have you heard of any exercise of eminent domain to, and remember, eminent domain does.
Contiguous wells to the town wells, right, on the same aquifer.
Well, the village wells.
The village wells. Right.
Better opportunity than a contiguous well right next to it. Could there be as an argument for eminent domain? I'm curious. Well, there may not be other examples.
Yeah,
The other question I'd ask is, have we explored all of the funding possibilities in front of us to pay for the infrastructure that's so badly needed that I respect the hear you arguing for and I understand the need.
Yeah.
Funding from the state, I think I understood an IMA possibility as a way to get to that.
As helps, right.
Co-joining the town and the village to work as a single entity. I would urge us, if it's possible, to do everything possible to find new sources of income through those methods, through exploring eminent domain as another path before we start, really considering selling water.
So
it is going to be a tough fight.
Sir, what's your name?
I'm sorry.
No worries.
I'm Andrew Dubin, and I'm at 234 Taylor Road. And you're hearing from the many houses and families.
Perfect.
On the same road.
Perfect. Perfect. So, sir, let me throw this out to you. You're an elected official. Let me throw this out to you. If you could get that, if you could, hypothetically speaking, if you could get those wells back in return for selling water, would you do it? When you're selling water that's not coming from that well field, would you do it?
It's one option. It's not the option I would take as an elected official. I would do everything possible not to have to trade water for what might be the rights of my town already. And that is something I think really worth exploring.
Sir, I appreciate that, and I understand you live out there, and it is the gravity of it, and the impact is it's more of an abstraction sitting here than it is to be living there.
And we don't mean to be difficult here.
No. I'm happy that you're here, but here's the thing. In this,
Let me just speak to that point. I guarantee you that I know he was there, and we all went to the high school, and we all spoke against that well. that was drilled down on the end of 32.
Yep.
So
And I appreciate his statement about, let's get that back. if
we
it's
were
possible,
all in
because-
your court,
Yeah.
trust me.
Yeah.
I was at that meeting, and we were all there, and we all spoke,
Yeah.
and.
Yeah. Mr. Dumy, can I,
unfortunately, it
We're on
didn't-
Taylor, but it's all our town. and we're all familiar with the
can I make a recommendation, because as we're getting later, and can I make a recommendation? And this is perfect, and I appreciate you guys showing up and going through this. Why don't we meet, like with the water superintendent, I'll invite any, you know,
I'd like to do that
Josh.
too.
Why don't we meet together, the four of us, or, you know, representatives from your street, and talk about this? But to the answer to your point, for 3 years, I have gone through this with the village board exhaustively, looking at options. We've talked to council, we've talked to engineers, we've talked to communities in similar positions. I thought we had a perfect solution in getting back, something we never should have given up or never should have let be sold somewhere else and not purchased it, whether it's a defensive purchase or we want to use it and use that resource later on. But I struggle to understand the fear in us taking water from the aqueduct that's not ours, that we're permitted to take, treating it, selling it at a premium, and working out a deal to get something back that it doesn't impact me at 11 Wood Avenue. It impacts you folks because your wells are out there. So I thought that your folks would have been the ones that would support something like that instead of saying, find some other funding mechanism. There's not and I'm not suggesting you're saying this, I'm not flippant. There's no magic pot of money. And as the engineers pointed out, and what we have experienced with these horrific catastrophic storms, we don't qualify for a lot of things. We're going to continue to exhaust every effort to do that. It ain't going to be enough. Just like the $1.6 million that we have as a fund balance, it's not enough. And that's why I'm trying to think outside of the box and putting this out and saying, let's at least consider it.
Well, I'll simply say thank you. for the
Thank you.
I think I and a number of the people on our road
Sure.
would be very happy to come to that meeting and discuss with you.
Shoot me an email, references to the mayor's email, and you can include the supervisor.
Yeah.
We will make time. We'll get with the water superintendent. We'll invite you guys, and we'll even come out to you. How about that? All right, you got it. You're gonna hold me to it, aren't you? Good. All right. All right, guys. Thank you. All right. Anybody else? We've gone over. Thank you to the engineers for putting this together. Thank you to the volunteer water committee. Thank you for the elected officials. Certainly thank you to Mike Trainer and his 8-member team, and that includes him, that handles all these things. And I just want to say, this is just the starting spot. We just scratched the surface, and I just wanted to be open, get it out there, let people talk, because when people hear rumors, it's never healthy if you don't hear it like this, an open session where it's being recorded, where people can listen to this, and you guys are here, so thank you. And with that, Josh?
Yeah, so I mean, basically, for me, 2 takeaways. The IMA is going to be really key to this, because that's how the town is going to ensure that its residents are protected. So we have to make sure that we strike the right balance with the village on this IMA to ensure that folks in Mountainville are protected. So that's where I think, your input will come into this. In terms of, development, I guess another option, if, we have, so there are, if we have the right amount of development, and the public will decide how much is too much, there's the possibility of having higher commercial rates, or of, what if we get so much development and we have to start drawing more water down from the Taylor, wells to fund development on 9W, but that's paying for the system. So it's kind of like this global question, is we have to pay for, infrastructure to support our tax base, and that's going to require more water. And where's that water coming from, and how's that going to impact? So it's kind of this like broader discussion that we have to have. And so I think, it's going to require going out to different areas of the town and, having these discussions. So I certainly welcome that. And I would say before we, conclude and, wrap up the water committee report, we definitely need to meet with the folks in Mountainville, because that should be taken into account.
Let's do it.
So.
All right. With that being said and done, I'm going to make a motion to the village board. All right. All in favor? Josh?
I'm going to make a motion to the town board. All in favor?
All right. Let me go say hello to those folks.
Wow, you almost got as long as a town meeting.